Hey everybody, Rosematter here. Welcome to part 30 of my Chaos Head Noah Let's Play. We're only 2 endings away from finishing the game. We are going to be doing the Remy playthrough. It's called ANIMA Archetype. And it's weird, like Remy's been such a big central character in the initial playthroughs, and then she's like barely popped up in all of the other girls' endings. So it's going to be good to kind of like have some significant time with her again because she's a very important character. So yeah, we're almost done, guys. Crazy to think about. It's been a long time coming, but yeah, without further ado, let's get into the Remy playthrough. All right, has a ribbon in her hair. Yes. He's wearing glasses. No. He's wearing over-the-knee socks. Yes. He's wearing a long skirt. No. Is making some sort of salute at me. Yes. In spite of all my questions, I couldn't manage to get a single word out. I simply hung my head in silence. At some point, the dragging sound had stopped. And in its place, there was a smell coming from her body. The stench of blood. I was sitting behind a computer monitor. I chugged down a cola to contain my excitement, then leaned back in my chair. That had been one hell of a delusion. I especially liked that mystery girl. I might give her a name and flesh out her personality in future delusions. I let my imagination run wild like this all the time. Usually I'd go on to cast an existing character as the girl, such as Seraton, so I might as well do that here too. Actually, Sarah didn't quite fit the vibe of the mystery girl. Well, at any rate, it was a lot of fun mixing together 2D and 3D in my delusions. I was the god of the world inside my head. In there, everything bent to my will. I said that to myself as if I were at my base, but when I remembered I was in an internet cafe, I quickly covered my mouth. I quietly peeked outside. It didn't seem like anyone had heard me just now, so meh. 2 hours prior. The light of the sunset bathed a hospital room in a vibrant orange. All was silent, as if time itself had stopped. Only a single person was present. Completely still, as if asleep, sat a boy in a wheelchair. It was around the time of day where one would find nurses rushing around the hospital serving patients their dinner. And yet, no such signs of activity made their way to the room. A moment later, the silence was broken by the sound of a door opening. A lone girl entered the room. The boy in the wheelchair lifted his head to acknowledge her, but did not speak. For a moment, the girl hesitated at the entrance. Looking around the room, she could sense a faint aura of loneliness emanating from it. The drab-looking room was minimal in size and reeked of disinfectant. This was where the two of them spent their days. An isolated location, eternally unknown to the rest of humanity. Not a single soul, be they a doctor, nurse, friend, or relative, ever came to visit. The boy and girl rarely exchanged words with one another. The boy had been hospitalized, and for a whole year had been comatose. Only just a month ago had he awoken. The girl had been essentially using his room as a place to stay. However, as much as she did trust him, their relationship had nothing to do with any sort of romantic or sexual attraction. Her only goal was to repay her debt to the boy, nothing more, nothing less. The boy was intentionally cold and distant, having even told her not to return once before. Yet, all the same, she remained. This was, in parts, because she had nowhere else to go. During his coma, she had been his lone caretaker. The couch in the room had become her bed, and even now, after he had awoken, she still used it as such. She spoke with warmth and sincerity. She held out a bag of food she had brought from the convenience store. Her words scared away the static atmosphere and breathed new life into the dead world that surrounded them. The girl surrendered herself to such an illusion, but did not mention this to the boy as she laid several kinds of bread atop the empty bed.
いつも思うんだけどさ、こんな食事で体は大丈夫？
もともと先は長くないから。買ってこさせて、ごめん。
いいのいいの。私の分のついでだから、気にしないで。
She forced herself to smile at the boy, and taking an egg sandwich for herself, she moved toward the window. Upon opening the window, the crisp autumn breeze permeated the quiet hospital room. Comfortably greeted by the wind, the girl narrowed her eyes and perched nimbly on the windowsill. The room was located considerably high up. Imaginably, falling would mean certain death. This, however, hardly mattered to the girl, who simply took a hearty bite out of her sandwich. The boy in the wheelchair paid her no heed. He did not even attempt to reach for the bread laid out on the bed.
ねえ、もう一度聞くけど、本当に彼を覚醒させるつもり？
うん。昨日、チャットをしてみてはっきりした。のぞみはすでに彼に目をつけている。ノア2も完成間近だし、急がないと。
どうしてもやるの？
そうだよ。
でもそれじゃのぞみと変わらない。彼に恐怖を与えて追い詰めて。
彼しかいないんだ。
彼が覚醒すればあなたは死ぬのに。
最初から覚悟の上だよ。彼に全ての責任を押し付けようとしている僕には相応の罰だと思う。
The girl kept her gaze focused on the setting sun, not daring to look over her shoulder at the boy. Her countenance laid her emotions bare. She looked as if she might burst into tears at any moment.
彼を消すっていう選択肢はないかな？
そうなったら僕はまた1年以上昏睡する覚悟で新しい僕を生み出さないとね。その頃にはノア2は完成して世界には絶望が溢れているだろうけど。
Despite his gentle tone, his words were laced with a touch of cynicism. Upon hearing them, the girl couldn't help but let out a sigh.
私はあなたのやり方には反対だな。
ノア2を完成させるわけにはいかない。
そうだけど、彼の立場を考えたら悲しすぎるよ。それにあなたが自殺しようとしているのをむざむざ指をくわえて見ているわけにもいかないし。
自殺じゃないよ。
私が何とかする。
The boy finally moved a little, taken aback by the girl's abrupt yet resolute words.
なんとかって？
Finishing off the last of her sandwich, she stepped down from the windowsill and turned to face him. Then, for some inexplicable reason, she snapped into a pose resembling that of a salute.
私がのぞみから彼を守る。そうすればあなたは死なないから。
それじゃあ彼が生まれた意味がなくなるし、何の解決にもならない。ノア2が。
ノア2も私が何とかするって。
君には無理だよ。
もう決めたの。私はあなたを守るためにあなたと対立します。
She gave him a frail yet tender smile. At the sight of this, the boy lost any and all words he had.
あなたの予言によると、今日新しい事件が起きるんだよね。
予言じゃない。事実だよ。彼らの妄想を見たからね。
だったら彼をその事件に近づけさせないようにしなくちゃ。私、ちょっと行ってくるね。
She approached the door.
君が邪魔をしても、僕は予定通り彼を目覚めさせるよ。
She opened the door, hearing the boy's words directed at her back. She paused for one final time. No signs of life came from the hallway. Not a single human being was in sight, and not a single sound reached the room.
ねえ。私たちって何なんだろう。 誰にも存在を知られずに、ここにもう1年以上いる。ここにいると、自分っていう存在は幻なんじゃないかって思えてきちゃうの。ジメジメ気分になるのは、やっぱり病院だからかな。
リミ、君は関わるべきじゃない。
Despite the boy's pleading, the girl did not look back.
パン、ちゃんと食べるんだよ。
After murmuring those last few words, the girl left the hospital room. Suddenly, a single sound resounded through the silent world. I turned my head to look for the source, but instead, I found a slew of shining objects scattered across the asphalt.
十字架
When I saw them, my body suddenly unfroze, and naturally, perhaps too naturally, I started moving toward them. Driven by curiosity, I picked one up. It was made of metal with a long pointy end like a needle. A stake? Or a nail, maybe? Whatever it was shaped like a cross, hence my initial confusion. It felt almost phantasmal, like it might float away at any moment. I tightened my grip on it. And the sound continued to reverberate faintly in the distance. A sound cold enough to send chills down my spine, repeating incessantly. Even so, I couldn't help but move towards its source. It was like I was in a trance. Was it just morbid curiosity? Or was I hoping that the noise would save me? That it would grant me salvation from the silent world? You know, this reminded me of that one German folktale. What was it called again? Oh yeah, The Pied Piper of Hamelin. A story in which the sound of one man's pipe lured over 100 children into following him. The clanging sound refused to stop, and the farther I walked, the louder it got. It was coming from farther down the alley, past the corner on my left. I could already tell, if I turned to that corner, I'd be met with the source of the sound. And yet, I never thought of turning back. Such a thought didn't even cross my mind. It was like my body was moving on its own. And so I turned the corner, and my eyes were struck by a vibrant crimson shining throughout the darkness. My first thought was, where have I seen this art piece before? My second thought was, it doesn't look very realistic. Maybe I was so shocked that my brain wasn't processing things properly. Normally, when I saw something this terrifying, I'd freeze, scream like a little girl, and piss my pants all at once. The work consisted of spikes arranged on a wall, like the quills of a hedgehog or pins in a pincushion. But when I looked closer, I realized the pincushion was leaking blood. So then, that meant the puddle of crimson below it was blood. The feeble glow of a streetlight just barely reached it, causing the pool to gleam in the darkness. Scattered around were a few shining pieces of what looked like meat. Maybe. I couldn't really tell. I tried to gulp, but my throat had gone completely dry. Not a single drop of saliva to be found. And then I realized the thing that was nailed to the wall was a human corpse. A murder that was far too unnatural, far too brutal, far too immoderate. And the one who done it, the one who had nailed these stakes to the wall, was a single girl. As for how I knew that, it was because she was right there, standing in front of her art, holding a bundle of stakes in her blood-soaked hand. I could only see her back from here, so I obviously had no clue what she looked like. What I could tell was that she was wearing a Sume Academy uniform. The stench of rotting garbage was intensifying, and I was hit with wave after wave of nausea. I put a hand in my mouth to stop myself from vomiting, but I was nearly at my limit. And then it suddenly dawned on me, the cause of my deja vu, the answer to the question, where have I seen this before?
あの時の将軍のリンク写真
Without meaning to, I'd said that out loud, without realizing how dangerous or even deadly the mistake could be. In response to my voice, her shoulder twitched slightly, and with that she slowly turned to face me. In that moment, it was as if her gaze was piercing straight through me, such desolate eyes. She had just killed someone. She too had heard the sound. Before, there had been a strange whirring sound, like something tearing its way through the air. Soon after she heard it, she discovered an origin. A rucksack worn by a nearby suspicious-looking person. When she attempted to pursue them, however, they escaped. That was when she had heard another sound echoing in the distance. The shrill sound of stakes being nailed into a wall, and though faint, the whirring sound from before could still be heard as well. The two sounds resonated in grating harmony, creating the illusion that her ears may start bleeding at any moment.
手遅れだった。
It's interesting to see this from Rimi's point of view. Like when we saw the illusion, I figured after a while, like the delusion was just Shogun doing that to freak me out, but lightly biting her lip, she sprinted toward the source of the sound, and there her eyes landed upon a corpse affixed to a wall by several cross-shaped stakes. But here it's different. That one's not bleeding. She's wearing her casual clothes, not the Sume Academy uniform. So am I seeing her differently from how she is herself? Startled, she surveyed her surroundings. Though she loathed to admit it, the status of the victim did not matter to her in the slightest. If granted the opportunity, she would have naturally preferred to save him, but it was much too late. And now there were more important matters at hand. She couldn't let Nishijo Takumi see this place. She couldn't let him be consumed by fear. So this whole thing is basically going to be Rimi trying to save Takumi from seeing all the stuff that Shogun... Like, she's basically fighting against Shogun to save Takumi from giving into the fear. Where could he be? With that on her mind, she returned her gaze to the corpse. There we go, that looks a little bloodier. She was at a loss for words. She had only looked away for a second, and yet, in that short time, countless stakes had gruesomely mutated the corpse. Just a moment ago, there had only been a few stakes on the wall, just enough to suspend the corpse in midair. There hadn't even been any internal injuries, let alone blood. But now, a grisly spectacle lay before her eyes. The sight of it left her reeling in horror, frantically fighting to endure her nausea. Her vision distorted as uncertainty seized her heart.
妄想が現実を侵食してる。
In that moment, the girl came to notice that the changes did not end there. Now, oh yeah, there we go. Now she's covered in it, and she's wearing the Sume Academy uniform. Her clothes were different. She was wearing a uniform unfamiliar to her from a school she didn't recognize. In addition, her body was stained with crimson, and in her hand was a stake.
嘘。これって。
Oh shit, is like, so did Shogun do this to make Rimi someone that Takumi wants to stay away from? That's pretty clever, because he knows that, like, she's gonna try and stop Shogun from scaring Takumi. So how does Shogun battle it? By making Rimi someone to be feared so that Takumi can't trust her or doesn't want to be near her.
妄想がシンクロ。
That seems like a new term. Someone's delusion had edited the scene around her. The gruesome corpse, her clothes, the rich scarlet blood. Was any of it real?
違う。
It couldn't possibly be real. There was no stench of blood. She couldn't feel the icy chill of the metal stake in her hand. She put her hand to her bloody cheek, and it came away dry. She carefully reached for one of the stakes planted in the body. But when she tried to grab it, her hand grasped nothing but air. Everything was a delusion, a far, far too vivid delusion. But at any moment, the delusion could become reality. It had already taken form. Once real booted, it would merge with reality. What was she to do? The girl was overtaken by doubt. A delusional space like this, oozing negativity, was well beyond anything she was used to dealing with. Such a powerful deluder may have already taken Nishijo Takumi's life. She might suddenly find Takumi pinned to the wall in this man's place. At this point, it would not even surprise her. Like, is the real Takumi able to create these delusions? Like, how does he know she's here? Is this Nozomi doing this? I have to assume that it's like the OG Takumi doing this. Driven by anxiety, she let out a soft cry, and right at that
あ
moment,
の時の将軍のリンク写真。
the terrified scream of a boy resounded from behind her. At first, she seemed shocked, but her expression quickly changed to a somber smile, and then
よかった。
she softly whispered those words. Thank goodness. Thank goodness for what? And why was she smiling at me? I didn't understand. The questions kept piling up to the point where it sent a chill down my spine. Now panicking, I tried averting my eyes. First thing that came to mind was, I don't want anything to do with this. I mean, for starters, I could hardly make eye contact with regular 3D girls, let alone psycho killers, and the police would be here soon, and I was hungry. That's why I should just go home. Yeah, I need to get out of here, as fast as humanly possible. If I don't, I'll go insane. Suddenly, she called me by my name, even though I'd never told her my name, even though I'd never even met her before.
あなたに会いたかった。
As she looked at me, her lips twisted into a horrifically fearsome smile, almost like she was a demon. Screaming at the top of my lungs, I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. It hurt to breathe, but I didn't care. I just kept screaming and running as if my life depended on it. At one point along the way, I turned my head to look back behind me, but she didn't seem to be chasing me. The vast majority of the nurses at Yoyogi's General Hospital were out making their rounds. Only one could still be found sitting alone at the nurse's station. She stared at a laptop with a deadpan expression on her face. Despite not being on break, she was in the middle of a phone call. It did not seem to matter to her in the slightest that she was violating her work's policy on cell phone usage. Reflected in her blank eyes was a certain chat log shining brightly on the computer screen before her.
ええ、そう。現れたのよ。西條匠が。
間違いないっすか？
多分。
Speaking on the other end of the call was a man. It was clear from how they spoke to one another the conversation had nothing to do with work.
名前はハンドルネームを使っているけれど、あの公式のことを知っていたもの。ログをコピーして送るわ。
With a mechanical flick of her wrist, the nurse moved the mouse with the intention of copying the log. However, she suddenly stopped. Her brow furrowed.
ら、
どうしたんす？
The nurse ignored the man's question, narrowing her eyes as she brought her face closer to the screen. The screen still displayed the chat logs. However, something seemed different from a few seconds ago. Alright, let me look. Let's see. What kind of bait and switch is this? Whoa, what's with the German? Don't worry, you're fine. Any reason for lurking? Did someone give you the you need to lurk for 6 months before posting spiel? Where are you chatting from? Something had changed, an impossibility considering they were logs, not real-time conversations. And yet, even though everything had felt perfectly normal a moment ago, something felt incredibly out of place now.
ログの書き込み時間
Oh,
が。
okay. I was looking at the actual logs, not the times that they happened.
どういうことだ？
The man understood how absurd her claim was, and the voice on the other end of the call became much lower.
ついさっきまでは不自然なところなんてなかったのに、これ一体どうなって。
落ち着け。相手は化け物級のギガロマニアックスだ。
細工されたのかしら。
自分の実在を知られたくないためだろ。
書き込み時間が変化したことで自作自演のように見えてくるわ。
Okay, that explains it.
そう見えるなら、それが狙いってことだ。現実を妄想にした。気をつけろ、シノ。見られているぞ。奴に。
Suddenly, a sense of uneasiness crept up the back of Shino's neck. Covering her nape with her hand, she turned to face the source of the gaze, but there was nobody there. Not a single soul could be found within the nurse's station.
信仰の救いあれ。
Shino murmured those words of prayer to herself, hoping they would sweep the fear away. There was no response, but why would there be? Hell, I'd be much more terrified if there had been.
Eh?
I heard something. I didn't know who it was, but whoever had been knocking was now opening the door of their own accord. I tried to get up, but the pain kept my body from listening to me. All I could do was stare with teary eyes as the door opened. The first thing I saw was a hand. The sleeve on it was clearly from a Sume Academy uniform. Next, I saw hair. A little longer than Nanami's, but shorter than Yua's. I didn't know who it was. The hair stirred, and the last thing I saw was a face suddenly peeking into the room.
こんにちは。
That was when I finally realized who it was. A person I never would have expected. The worst possible plot twist. Feelings of intense despair threatened to steal every bit of hope away from me. The demon girl. I thought it'd be Yua. I never would have thought the demon girl herself would come marching in.
いたいた。
Our eyes met, and right as they did, the demon girl smiled with glee. Her smile sent chills down my spine.
もう、どうしてすぐ返事してくれないの？
Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. Her hand hidden by the door had to be gripping one of the cross-shaped stakes. It had to be. She'd finally come to kill me. She was gonna kill me as she laughed and laughed in pure ecstasy. It had to be because of the detectives I talked to. She'd seen me do it with her clairvoyance. Don't kill me, I tried to scream, but I was too terrified to make a sound.
コロッケ？
Tilting her neck to the side, the demon girl unleashed a strange incantation. It had to be some demonic tongue. She was cursing me. In hopes of gaining as much distance as possible from her, I frantically started crawling backwards on my ass. My hand slipped countless times on random garbage scattered across the floor as I scrambled for the furthest thing away from her, my computer desk.
ねえ、入っていいかな？っていうか、入っちゃいます。
The demon girl began encroaching further upon my territory. She even politely took off her
お
shoes.
邪魔しちゃった。あ、散らかってても私、平気だから、気にしないでね。
The door closed. My escape route had been cut off. However, despite what I thought earlier, the demon girl was only carrying a bag. I didn't see anything resembling a deadly weapon. Wait, that just meant it was inside her bag. It had to be. I had to be extremely careful. The second I let my guard down, she'd swoop in and end me. Or maybe she already had, with the curse she'd placed on me a minute ago. In a few days, my entire body would suddenly start spewing blood everywhere, and I'd die right then and there.
頼むよ。殺さないで。
I got down on my hands and knees, cradling my head between my arms. Those goddamn detectives had completely fucked me over.
警察に喋ったこと謝るから。
警察？
それに話してもちっとも信じてもらえてなかったし。
It was a lie meant to buy me some time. The older detective had said he'd guarantee my safety. If he was doing his job properly, he had to have sent at least one officer over to my place. Upon thinking that, I suddenly realized I'd given the old man my phone number, but I hadn't given him my address.
ビシッ。
Suddenly, the demon girl assumed a pose resembling a salute. And what was just as if not more strange was what she'd said. It was almost like a sound effect. Was it another demonic curse?
独り言はやめるべし。殺さないでとか、警察がどうとか、私には何のことかさっぱりだよ。
What? Was she trying to play dumb? Or was this her roundabout way of threatening me, and in actuality she was saying, forget the truth, act as if nothing ever happened? What the hell was she thinking? Hadn't she come here to kill me?
ほら、立てる？立とう。
The demon girl walked toward me and slowly reached out her hand. Her expression was so gentle, and now that I was seeing her up close, she was actually pretty cute. Damn it, I was letting her get to me. Stopped acting like a goddamn idiot. Was I seriously calling a demon pretty cute? She was a murderer. She'd used Yua and Shogun to trap me, and now she'd come to finish me off herself. Don't trust her. I'd already learned my lesson back with Yua. I'd never make the same mistake again. I refused to take her hand. Don't be deceived by the demon girl's smile. She was a demon trying to tempt me. If I gave in to that temptation, I'd die. Trust no one. Don't believe anything. Don't believe anything anyone says.
だって見たんだ。お前が人を殺してるとこ。
あのさ、タク。それ、かなりひどいこと言ってるって気づいてる？まさか殺人犯呼ばわりされるなんてね。たはは。
What was she gonna do with me?
NewGen の
Just like with the guy in the fourth case, was she gonna...
殺すんでしょう。それとも、岩とか、将軍とかがいる場所に連れてって。
ユア将軍誰それ
Maybe the three of them had decided to work together. That way I wouldn't be able to fight back when they beat me to death.
そんなのやだ。助けて。
じゃあね、私を殺人犯扱いしなければ助けてあげる。
So that was her true goal.
そんなビビらないでよ。いちいち私がへこむようなリアクションしてくれるよね。
お願いだ。もう二度と誰にも喋らないから。だから見逃して。
もしもーし。タク、ちょっと落ち着こう。
This bitch acting like we were close or something, calling me Taku and shit. Wait, actually, how did she know my name? She'd already known it back when we first met at the crucifixion crime scene. How? How did she know it? And also, how had she known where my base was?
当然でしょ。あなたの名前を知ってるのは。
Had she just read my mind? I knew she was clairvoyant. She knew my name, my address, all because she'd used her powers on me.
タクって結構独り言多いよね。前から思ってたことだけど。
Always. How long was she talking? Wait, had I been talking to myself out loud just now? I hadn't been aware of it at all. Was that really true? Had I really been talking to myself out loud? Or was it possible she was just lying to me, and in actuality she'd read my mind?
タクの名前を知らないわけないよ。私、物覚えはそんなに良くない方だけど。友達の名前くらい、覚えるよ。
Friends?
それともタク、私のことバカにしてる？そりゃ私、テストの点数はそんなに良くないけど。面と向かってそういうこと言われると、傷ついちゃうな。
Was someone here crazy? But who was it? Me? Her?
もしかして、転校生？
そういえば、近いうちに転校生が来るらしいよ。チカチン先生が言ってた。
There were two different conversations going on here. My terror from earlier, together with the anxiety of having no idea when I'd get killed, was starting to fade. But rushing in to replace it was a completely new kind of dread, slithering in to slowly erode my mind.
もしもし？その顔はまさか、まだ信じてくれてない？
誰だ？
Who are they? A murderer? A demon girl? That was who.
うわ、タクこそクラスメートの顔を覚えてないんだ。ひどー。
Did she say classmate? So we weren't just friends, but classmates too?
でもまあ、しょうがないか。タクはあんまり学校来ないもんね。だからって、私の存在丸ごとなかったことにするのはどうかと思う。ちなみに、名前も忘れちゃってるわけかな。はいはい、そうなのね。ショック。じゃあ、思い出させてあげますよっと。私は、崎畑凛美。
So this is different from before. Like before, I remembered it on my own. This time, she's telling me her name.
リアクションなしかい。崎畑凛美。思い出した？
I hadn't even heard the name before. Besides, other than Yua, I'd never met a 3D girl who talked to me like we were this close in my life. And Yua was the demon girl's underling. Wait, that was it. What the girl calling herself Sakihata was doing right now was exactly the same as what Yua had done. This temptress knew I wasn't used to interacting with 3D girls, so she was attempting to lead me into a trap by behaving all friendly and trying to seduce me. It was the same exact strategy. And the thing is, while I barely remember my classmates' faces at all, and I didn't plan to either, I could say with absolute certainty I'd never seen this girl's face in the same classroom as me before. Probably. Damn it, I couldn't completely rule it out. After all, whenever I was at school, I was usually glued to my desk until the final bell, pretending to sleep, having delusions, staring at my desk, or feigning reading my textbooks. I didn't do anything else. I had next to no memory of my classmates' names and faces, so I didn't even try to remember any. Which was it? Was she telling the truth, or was it all a lie? No, it didn't matter whether or not we were classmates, because the one thing I knew for sure, the one hard, indisputable fact, was that she had committed murder.
たく、記憶力ゼロ？まあいいや。じゃあ、大臣に聞いてみて。
Daichin? What the hell was that? Was that a person, or some sort of secret code? Another demonic incantation?
大臣だよ、大臣。三角大輔。
え
She knew Misumi-kun's name, and not only that, but she was calling him Daichin? She wouldn't call him that unless they were really close.
というわけで、
The demon girl quickly zeroed in on my cell phone that I had left lying on the sofa, picked it up, and held it out to me. It seemed like she wanted me to try calling Misumi-kun. I didn't like using phones, but she might kill me if I went against her orders. Driven by fear and with no other choice, I went to call him, only to realize I didn't know his phone number. Upon seeing me freeze up in confusion, the demon girl tilted her head in confusion once again. And after a moment, she came up beside me and peered over my shoulder at the screen. Her hair swayed as she moved, sending the pleasant fragrance of shampoo drifting down to the tip of my nose. No, she's a demon. I'll never let her seduce me. I'm not into 3D. Lend me your power, Seraton.
もしかして、番号知らない？だったら先にそう言ってくれなきゃ。ごめんごめん。
With a light apology, the demon girl snatched the phone from my hand. Her fingers graced mine for a fleeting moment. They were warm. I guess both demons and humans had the same blood running through their veins.
大臣の番号はね、ほいほいほいの。
The demon girl entered his number without a hitch. It was clear she dialed it many times before.
つながった。
She held the cell phone out to me with a smile. Not knowing what else to do, I ended up taking it for no real reason and putting it up to my ear. I heard the sound of the phone ringing. Eventually, the sound stopped and was replaced by the voice of Misumi-kun.
Oh.
They didn't give their name. It sounded like they were downtown or something, as I could hear a bunch of noise coming through the receiver. I really hated phones. I had no idea whether or not it was Misumi-kun on the other end. The voice sounded like his, but I also had the strange feeling that something was slightly different about it.
たく、大臣出た？
This time, the demon girl peered at me from right in front of me. Shit, she was way too close. I turned my back to her and steeled myself.
西。
Wait, wasn't that a bit strange? How had he figured out it was me that quickly? I hadn't even gotten halfway through my name yet.
慣れない番号だったから誰かと思ったぜ。お前、もしかして携帯買ったのか？
For example, there was the possibility the demon girl had made a phone call to someone who sounded like Misumi-kun. Maybe the person who sounded like Misumi-kun was just another underling of hers, and he was only pretending to be Misumi-kun in order to trick me. Maybe the demon girl already knew I didn't know Misumi-kun's phone number, and so she'd been leading up to this all this time. I was starting to doubt anything and everything. I didn't know what was true and what was a lie. Hold on, what the hell kind of trap was the demon girl trying to make me fall into anyway? Why bother with a trap this elaborate? In a situation like this, wouldn't it be easier and quicker for her to just go ahead and kill me already? Or was there some reason behind it? Some kind of prerequisite saying she had to trick me, even if it meant taking it this slow? No, maybe it was some hidden camera type thing spearheaded by Misumi-kun. The girl wasn't actually my classmate, but Misumi-kun's girlfriend, and he'd sent her here in order to screw with me. As fucking if. If that were the case, how the hell would I explain everything that had happened at the crucifixion crime scene?
ね、タク、なんかよ、お前から連絡してくるなんて珍しいこともあるもんだな。ま、俺としては野郎からの電話なんてあんま嬉しくねえんだけどな。
His tone of voice sounded exactly like Misumi-kun's. The more I heard it, the more convinced I was the person on the other end had to be him.
女の口説き方でも教えてもらいたいのか？なわけねえか。
Should I start talking? I sensed a gaze on my back. The girl was staring at me. The chills on the back of my neck still hadn't gone away. What kind of expression was the demon girl making? I wanted to turn around and see for myself, but I was too scared.
用がねえなら切るぞ。お前の無言電話に付き合ってるほど暇じゃねえんだ。今、女と一緒だからよ。だからなんだよ。用があるなら早く言えって。
その、
なんだよ。早く言えって。
うちの、クラス、
ああ、うちのクラスがどうした？
いる
何が？
女子。先畑って名前の。
Despite steadily becoming more and more incoherent, I somehow managed to explain myself. Suddenly, Misumi-kun stopped responding. Silence. However, I could still hear the noise of the city around him, so the call hadn't disconnected or anything. Why wasn't he talking? The next thing I heard was an extremely exaggerated
お
sigh.
前さ、ゲーム脳じゃねえの？
Where did that come from? And not only was it completely out of left field, but he'd brought up that bullshit condition that had been coined despite having no scientific backing whatsoever.
一瞬考えちまったよ。先畑なんて名字で言うからよ。それってリミのことだろ？
How?
お前、いくら三次元の女に興味ねえからって、あいつのことまで忘れるか？俺はともかく、お前は1年の時から同じクラスだったろ？この前だって3人で一緒に映画見に行ったじゃねえか。
I couldn't comprehend what the person that sounded like Misumi-kun was saying. He'd said the demon girl and I had been in the same class since first year, and that the three of us had seen a movie together pretty recently. Pretty recently, but when exactly?
俺がお前とダチになったのだって、最初はリミに付き合わされたのがきっかけだったしな。俺と同じで、リミも物好きだからよ。ニートのお前を気にかけてやってるのは、世界広しといえど、俺とリミぐらいだぜ。あ、それは言い過ぎか。
The words I heard on the other end of the call, not a single one of them felt real to me. I had absolutely no memory of any of it. I couldn't acknowledge that any of that had happened in the past. I just couldn't. It was all some story the person who sounded like Misumi-kun had made up. It couldn't be my past. The past could only be established as truth if a person remembered it. So if I didn't remember it, it wasn't true.
っていうか、リミってマジで女っ気ないよな。おっと、これはあいつには言うなよ。
君は誰だ？
おいおい、マジでおかしくなったか？俺のことまで忘れたわけか？ゲーのやりすぎ。
Yeah, before I think when he said that, he's like, how did we meet anyway? Or something like, how did we end up becoming friends? And this time, like, he laid it all out exactly like how it happened. Unable to take it anymore, I hung up the phone. My breathing had grown extremely heavy without me noticing. The sweat that had been beading on my forehead showed no signs of stopping. In fact, it was increasing. Long trails of sweat trickled down my entire body, starting from my face and ending at my feet.
たく、汗びっしょりだよ。
The demon girl, looking worried about me, calmly offered me a handkerchief. A cute, patternless vermilion handkerchief. There was a faint floral scent to it. Instead of taking it, I attempted to somehow maintain my composure and organize my thoughts about everything that was happening. But in the end, it didn't go too well. I was doubting anything and everything, causing all my thoughts to rapidly churn together into a chaotic whirlpool. Sighing in minor disappointment, the demon girl put away her handkerchief. And then with a triumphant look on her face, she asked me a question. So before, I think I took the handkerchief.
で、大臣はなんて？
She was, oh, no, I think I took the handkerchief after I got sick, later on. She was acting like she already knew the answer. I couldn't afford to answer her. What was she, an ordinary classmate or a monster? I had no idea. Maybe I was the crazy one. Taking the chat with Shogun into consideration, I couldn't rule out the possibility that someone other than myself was controlling my body. Or maybe all my memories of the demon girl, of the girl named Sakihata Rimi, had somehow gotten knocked right out of me due to some freak accident or something. At this point, I didn't know anything about myself for sure. Did I have amnesia? Did I sleepwalk? Or could it be something else entirely?
大丈夫？体、辛いならソファーで横になる？
Demon Girl spoke to me kindly. Don't let your guard down. Anyone who acts nice to an otaku freak like me must have some kind of ulterior motive. I shook my head, putting my strong will to resist against the Demon Girl on full display. Then, using the same strength, I raised my head. Sweat got into my eyes, blurring my vision. The Demon Girl's face was a lot closer than I'd expected it to be. What color eyes were those?
なんで
なになに？
ここにいる？
ああ、ごめんね。勝手に入っちゃって。でも、ノックしてたんだよ。タクは全然出てきてくれないし、中でものすごい音が聞こえてくるしで、結構ハラハラしてたんだから。
なんで
今度は何？
ここにいる？
No one asked what caused her to trespass. No, my question was, what was her reason for coming? If she'd come to kill me, she would have done it a long time ago. So why wasn't she doing anything?
ああ、ここに来た理由？ね。
The demon girl reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper.
はい。進路希望のプリント、持ってきてあげたの。
I found myself taking it from her without really thinking. She wasn't lying. The piece of paper did have post-graduation's aspirations written on it, along with 3 blank spaces to write your answers in. Was this it? Was that really all she'd come for?
帰ってよ。
I don't want anything to do with her. I don't want anything to do with any 3D girls. This is a trap. Don't listen to her. This isn't reality. This is a game, one filled with bugs. There are way too many contradictions. It doesn't hold together as a proper story.
僕に関わらないでよ。
If you don't intend to kill me, then just leave me alone. I am me. Some me that isn't me may be friends with Saki Hatarimi, but that me has nothing to do with the current me. Cradling my head, I closed myself off completely. I kept trembling and trembling, envisioning the girl known as Saki Hatarimi wasn't there anymore. Not long after, I heard the sound of the door opening, telling me that the demon girl had left. Standing in the center of a dimly lit room, Saki Hatarimi hung her head, remaining deathly still. The room's owner, Nishijo Takumi, Taku, was not currently present. He had not locked the door before he left, so Rimi had easily been able to enter. She checked the time on her cell phone. It was nearly 10 p.m. Is Taku still at Scramble Crossing? If she had been able, she would have helped him straight away. She had already attempted to once before, but the closer she'd gotten to Scramble Crossing, the denser the crowd had become, and eventually she'd been rendered unable to move. In the end, the Esper Boy show had concluded before she had reached O-Front. It was then that she had heard Takumi's voice. He pleaded with her to return Nanami's hand. It was not often that Takumi would ask Rimi for a favor. Nozomi had kidnapped Nanami, and they were currently subjecting her to all manner of torture. Takumi had been able to locate her using his mind-reading abilities. As she and Nanami had been acquainted in the past, hearing this news broke Rimi's heart. A cardboard box sat on the sofa. Contained within it was a cell phone, a petite bangle, and Nanami's severed hand. The sight left Rimi at a loss for words. Concern, anguish, and sorrow overwhelmed her. All at once, memories of her own past hardships flashed through her mind. Forcefully biting her lip, Rimi stared at the hand for a few moments. Oh, is this like when he came back, the hand was gone? It's because she took it, and then with a deep breath, she gently closed the lid of the box, sealed it with duct tape, and left the room with the package in tow. I like these chapters that kind of like fill in the little holes of the original story. Rimi took out her cell phone and connected to the 1SEG television broadcasting service. The events at Scramble Crossing had been on the news earlier, so she tuned into it, hoping to confirm something. But when the channel came on, it was in the midst of a commercial break, which must have meant that they were not broadcasting live anymore. In other words, Taku must not have been at Scramble Crossing anymore. Knowing this, Rimi reluctantly returned to the hospital room she shared with Takumi. The lights were off. The room was as pitch black as when she had left it. The bed was empty, as Takumi was sitting in his wheelchair instead, something that Rimi had become accustomed to.
ナナミの腕は
持ってきた。
Rimi opened the box and presented it to Takumi.
ありがと
直せるかな？直せるよね。
う。わからない。でもこの病院なら冷凍保存しておける設備がある。
Of course, freezing it would be better than nothing, but there was no guarantee it could ever be returned to her. That was what his eyes conveyed to her.
大丈夫。きっと、治るよ。
Rimi boldly declared this with a positive flair.
きっと治るって。信じる。もっとも、その前に、ナナミちゃんを助け出さなきゃいけないけど。
ナナミは殺されることはないと思う。焦って動くことはないよ。
冷静なんだね。ごめん。今言った言葉は忘れて。それより、タクは今どこにいるかわかる？
この病院に搬送されてきたよ。精神科の病室で眠ってる。
そうなの？
Rimi's eyes widened, and she immediately burst out of the room. Visiting hours had long since ended, forcing Rimi to conceal the sound of her footsteps as she traversed the dim hallways. She knew that both Nozomi and the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light were among the hospital staff. She could not afford to attract any unwanted attention. Following a long and arduous trek, she arrived at the room that Takumi had informed her of. Upon inspecting her surroundings to ensure she'd not be seen, she slowly opened the door. The room was pure white, the entirety providing not even the slightest hint of warmth. Rimi silently approached the bed in the center of the room. Taku lay there, sleeping deeply. His forehead beaded with sweat, his eyebrows were furrowed, and a moan would occasionally escape his lips. Rimi reached out towards Taku's cheek and gently caressed it.
ごめんね。あなたを守ってあげられなくて。
Unable to withhold her emotions any longer, she whispered that into his ear. The pale evening sun shone through the window of a hospital room. A light, singed red by the twilight, divided the room into two distinct parts, one captivated by light and one dominated by darkness. And what was illuminated by that light was a bed adorned with pure white sheets. On the bedside table sat a handheld video game console. A number of academic books lined a nearby shelf, neighbored by the muted pink petals of an arrangement of cosmos flowers resting in a vase. The room was neat and tidy. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. It was a space where time seemed to have come to a stop. A window cut into the evening sky, and by that window was a small figure sitting in a wheelchair. The figure's back to the window, he remained still and motionless. His breathing was so light, and the intervals between each breath were so long, one might think he was already dead. His skin was covered with wrinkles, his cheeks were hollow, his eye sockets were sunken in, his scalp was barren. With these features, it was often questioned whether he should be referred to as a young boy or an old man. His shadow, which he dubbed Shogun, extended all the way to the door of the room. The world then moved for the first time. The door slowly opened, and a figure emerged from the darkened corridor, stepping foot into the room steeped in evening glow. Saki Hatsurimi did not fully enter the hospital room, instead choosing to remain at the entrance. Her expression, illuminated by the setting sun, detailed how the girl had been deep in thought.
もう、やめよう。残念だけど、あの彼は、西条匠は、消すべきだよ。
Shogun remained motionless in response to her
どうし
words.
て？
危険だから。
Rimi's voice was laden with grief and sorrow. Her eyes appeared slightly moist.
私が、消そうか。
ダメだよ。
Rimi was unable to confirm whether or not he was actually moving his mouth to speak.
彼にはやってもらわなくちゃいけないことがあるんだ。
Rimi hung her head and gently ran her fingers through her hair that draped down before her.
例えば、あなたは、夢に見たことを覚えていられる？
うん。
そっか。私、 すぐ忘れちゃうんだ。
できる人とできない人がいる。
できる人はきっとロマンチストなんだね。
すごく長い夢をよく見るよ。見ている間は何年にも感じられる。
私もそうだった気がする。でもそれは幻。実際の時間としては寝ているうちのほんの 2,3 秒程度のものなんだって。夢って心の歌方なの。だから早く目覚めて出ないと。いつかあなたは西条匠に殺されちゃう。
それでも構わないよ。夢から覚めるわけにはいかない。この夢は完結させなくちゃ。
完結した夢の後には何が残るの？
All right, here we go. Finally, chapter 9. This one took a while to get to. Aoi-san's eyes shot wide at the sight of my D-sword. Okay, so now we're on her point of view. Her blow had been fairly quick, but stopping it had been hardly any trouble. Our D-swords resonated with one another, releasing a shrill cry that enveloped the two of us. I could feel Aoi-san's negative emotions, her fury, her hatred, coming forth from her D-sword.
先畑さんも気がロマニアックスだったのら。
Behind me, Taku sank to the floor in shock. In that state, it would be impossible to get him to escape at this point. So, I had no choice but to deal with Aoi-san somehow.
その男が何をしたか知っているのか？ IR2 という公式を。
知ってるよ。
I cut Aoi-san short. I didn't want Taku to even hear its
それ
name.
なら
タクを覚醒させればもっと大変なことになる。
その前に殺す。
あなたには無理だよ。
Aoi-san was incredibly aggressive, but she fundamentally misunderstood how a D-sword should have been used. Her attacks were far too straightforward, far too impulsive. Treating her sword as just a simple sword would translate only to a little kid swinging around a tree branch. There was a distinct difference between someone who had been properly instructed on how to wield it and an ordinary high school girl. Dealing with her would be child's play.
西条は死ぬべき男だ。この世に最悪を振りまいたんだから。
Aoi-san had been consumed by hatred. Her negative delusions were clearly visible to me. Pouring out from within her, they transformed into a hulking black miasma and forcibly pierced into my dead spots. Aoi-san couldn't have been doing it consciously. However, they wouldn't normally be visible to just anyone she faced. This was a characteristic unique to gigalomaniacs. When facing another human, it was possible to make that surge of emotions visible, and with that you could lay all their emotions bare. I focused my attention on the images that were forcefully being projected into and eroding my mind. The emotions that fueled Aoi-san's hatred, her memories. I could see them. Her pain, her sorrow, her memories of the past that tormented her. And using those memories. Oh, okay, so yeah, this was the point of view where... So that's how the father appeared. Because I remember in the original version of this, like I was just watching from Takumi's point of view, was all of a sudden like her dad showed up. So Rimi used like going into her head, seeing her memories and conjuring her dad as a delusion. I glared at Aoi-san and formed a delusion. I fabricated a fictitious scene that would twist the knife in her wounds. A shudder ran through her body. Slowly lowering her sword, she then froze completely. Her expression showed she was clearly shaken. Her eyes were empty. She was no longer looking at me, nor reality. She was now inside the delusion I had fabricated. But I had just given her a cue. The rest of the story was of her own making, guided by her own obsession. And now Aoi-san could no longer fight. I jumped. I could feel a voice reverberating within my mind.
るの？殺しちゃうのかな？かな？
I looked over toward the container house.
もしもね、殺すって言うんなら、
Sword of many facets, an overwhelming sense of corrosive misfortune, a pure, unadulterated savagery, and a destructive nobility. It was Orihara-san's D-sword.
崎畑さんのこと、悪い人リストに入れちゃうなら、リストにね、入った人は、
Upon lifting her D-sword high up in the air, Orihara-san smiled cheerfully.
コズピーが皆殺しにするの。私は。
殺せ！
All of a sudden, Taku raised his voice to a shriek.
セナもコズピーも敵なんだ。敵だったんだ。だからリミ殺しちゃえよ。僕は死にたくない。
タク、ちょっと黙って。はーい、リスト入り。
Orihara-san twisted her lips into a
二
smile.
人とも殺しちゃうから。
Okay, this is new, I think. It came like a storm. The sheer speed at which he charged at me was simply inhuman. I was taken by surprise. Orihara-san's D-sword came down on me like a stake being pounded into the earth. I immediately jumped back, but the impact was so strong I was blown back anyway. I somehow managed to land on my feet. Next came a horizontal swing. I tried to deflect it with my sword. But I failed. I ended up taking the blow head on. My arms went completely numb.
死ね死ね。
Orihara-san charged at me with unbelievable strength. I had no room to counterattack. How was she so adept at fighting? Despite her small frame, Orihara-san swung her giant D-sword around with no issue at all. Her footwork was wild and unsteady. Okay, yeah, it's like, we saw it when she gets, like, in a way. It's like the sword controls her rather than her controlling the sword. Her footsteps were wild and unsteady. Each step she took was incredibly unstable. Her feet were barely touching the ground. Rather than she being the one swinging the sword, it felt as if the sword was swinging her.
崎畑さんも匠さんも悪い人だったんだね。二人とも殺します。タクは殺させない。
As I desperately deflected Orihara-san's blows, just as I had done before with Senna, I focused on the negative emotions pouring out from within her. Oh, with this, it's going to be... Is it the mirrors? She has, like, that fear of mirrors. The image that appeared in the back of my mind was a mirror. Wasting no time, I sent that delusion into Orihara-san's dead spots. Yeah, I don't remember the Kozupi fight at all. I remember Senna seeing her father. Orihara-san's movements came to a sudden halt. Tears began to pour from her eyes. I let out a sigh of relief. I had to get Taku out of here while I still could. That was when I noticed. I couldn't see Aoi-san anywhere. I looked all around the rooftop, and saw her standing at the very edge of it. I frantically took off running, but before I could reach her, her body slowly drifted forward, and then she disappeared over the edge. Oh, whoa, what? Oh no, because like before, Rimi had saved her, hadn't she? Like she had grabbed her before she fell, the sound of something crashing into the ground, the sound of something smashing against the earth. I heard it faintly in the distance. Had she died? Had Aoi-san died? Because of the delusion I'd shown her. No, I didn't mean to... A fierce blast of wind came from behind me. The impact was tremendous. Felt like I had been hit by a truck. I felt my brain being shaken around inside my skull. Unable to brace myself beforehand, I was sent flying. I hit the ground hard, and a sharp pain shot throughout my entire body. I hadn't been cut in any way, but I had taken an extremely hard blow from her fiendish D-sword. My vision was intensely blurry. I tried to get up, but I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't tell who I was anymore. I might have suffered a light concussion. I tried desperately to look up. So, is this the version, unlike in the original one, where, like, because Takumi couldn't keep his mouth shut and said to, like, kill both of them, which sent Kozabi on a tear. So I took my eyes off of Aoi and then she just died as a result. I was like, oh no, so this is like if everything had just gone wrong in this fight. Orihara-san, don't tell me she's gonna fall off the roof too. Orihara-san was staggering around, cradling her head in her hands. She violently shook it from side to side. Had the delusion I'd shown her made her lose sight of who she was? She was moving toward Taku. She was going to kill him. Why didn't you run away? Why are you still here? I had to help him. I closed my fists, but my D-sword wasn't in my hand. I had accidentally let go of it when I'd been hit by the blast earlier. It was lying on the ground a short distance away from me. Taku was crying out for my help. I have to save him. I won't let anyone kill him. But I'm too far away. I won't make it. Orihara-san had already raised her D-sword. Taku would die in an instant. He'd sunk to his knees and could no longer move. In less than a second, he would literally be crushed by her D-sword. I have to save him. No matter what I do, I won't make it. Numerous voices surged within me. My thoughts grew erratic. Countless me's pierced me with their gazes from inside my head. Countless me's whispered with their mouths. The whispers continued to cascade, pooling together in a violent flood of voices, each one gnawing away at any and all reason I had. I desperately stood up, but I couldn't do any more than that. I won't make it. I gritted my teeth. Taku is going to die. Kill her. Oh shit, kill Orihara Kozoe. If I could protect him, then nothing else matters. No, it's not like that. Kill her. This is like what Kozabi feels like when she kind of battles with her own feelings, like the side of her that wants to kill and the side of her that doesn't. Wouldn't it be better if Taku died here? Kill Orihara Kozoe. Kill Nishijo Takumi. That's the wish of both Saki Hatarimi and Takumi, isn't it? You're wrong. Before I knew it, the D-sword was in my hands. It was supposed to be on the ground, yet I was holding it. Damn, this is Rimi going on a tear. She's killed 2 people. I felt this one person accidentally. I felt the sensation of gouging flesh. This is revenge for Kozapi killing Rimi and her ending. I didn't know how I'd close the distance between me and Orihara-san, but when I looked, I saw that the D-sword I'd been holding in my hands had sunk deep into her delicate back. I was resisting against a will of some kind. I had no intention of killing her. Or was this really my own will? My true nature? Orihara-san looked back at me with an empty expression on her face. This is wrong. I don't want to kill her. If I don't stop, she'll... My D-sword wriggled and squirmed. As if it had a will of its own, it trembled with the joy of taking a life, the delight of bathing in blood. I frantically shook my head in denial. My D-sword's wings, its fangs. Ooh, I wonder if maybe the angel wings are going to turn into like devil wings as they get more blood, creaked loudly as they bored into Orihara-san's back. Even now, it was trying to gnaw into and tear her apart. I tried pulling it out, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't even let go of my sword. Orihara-san coughed up blood and landed on my sword, dyeing it red. As if it was a pair of wings spreading, it twisted itself deep into Orihara-san's body and tore her apart. God damn, I wasn't expecting the Rimi ending to be so violent. Blood burst into the air, and the petite girl who had been alive just a second ago transformed into nothing but mere lumps of flesh. Crimson illusionary feathers poured down around me.
私はこんなの望んでない。
Seeking desperately for someone to save me. You're gonna look at Takumi to save you? That guy is useless. I looked around. Taku was staring at me as if he'd seen a monster.
私は殺すつもりなんてなかった。殺すつもりなんてなかったのに。
But I killed them anyway. Both Sana and Kozupi were dead. They died right before my very eyes, and Rimi had been the one to kill them. Right now, she was lying down on the sofa, sleeping. After Kozupi had died, she'd started trembling, let out a scream, then immediately lost consciousness. I hadn't even been able to stand up for a while from the shock. I'd been scared shitless. My fear had kept building and building, and eventually I couldn't stand to look at Kozupi's bloody corpse any longer. So I got up, carried Rimi to my room, and shut us in. She would occasionally let out a pained moan, but no matter how many times I called her name, she wouldn't regain consciousness. So I just sat down, hugged my knees, and waited for Rimi to wake up. There wasn't much I could do about my trembling. Senna and Kozupi had just died after all. Unlike the NewGen victims, they were far from being complete strangers. I knew them, talked to them, spent time with them. Just yesterday, the three of us had eaten Crunchy-Kuns together. Senna, Kozupi, and I. When I saw the photo with the three of us in it, I bit my lip. It didn't matter how much I wanted to forget it. That scene ripped straight from a nightmare played again and again in the back of my mind. Kozupi's vivid, crimson blood, the slimy, sickly texture of the glistening bone sticking out from her body, her emotionless eyes that had lost all light, and the indescribable fear and sickness I'd felt in that moment when I saw another person cease to be a person. The moment when her slender body had been ripped apart, had been burned into my retinas. In that moment, I'd learned how frail people truly were. I felt like I was about to throw up. If I did end up doing so, that would make it the 4th time I'd puked. What had ended up happening to Senna? This was an 8-story building. Having fallen all the way from the roof, there was no way she'd made it out unscathed. She'd definitely died. The two of them were both dead. I couldn't believe it. It couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a nightmare. Yeah, that was the only explanation. Dying in such a horrific way. And if it wasn't already enough, it was Rimi who'd killed them. Well, careful what you wish for, Takumi. You told her to do it. I didn't want to believe it. There was no way I could. But it was the truth. I didn't understand why Senna and Kozupi had suddenly turned hostile and tried to attack me. She had said something about IR2. It probably had something to do with my essay from back when I was a kid, but I couldn't care less about that now. After that, Rimi had been revealed to be a gigalomaniac, something that honestly hadn't surprised me too much. But then, she fought to protect me. She might have gone too far, sure, but there was no way I was going to hold a grudge over that. Still, if things stayed like this, both Rimi and I would get caught by the police. Senna's and Kozupi's corpses were just lying around out there. Eventually, someone would find them and notify the police. I couldn't get caught. As if I'd ever let that happen. I could just tell the truth. I hadn't killed anyone after all. Rimi had. And besides, Senna and Kozupi had attacked me first, so that had to count legally as self-defense. But I was well aware that none of that would work. Back when the crucifixion had happened, I'd almost been named the culprit. There was no doubt in my mind it would go the exact same way this time. Moreover, I needed Rimi. If she didn't exist, if she wasn't here to protect me from the threat of Shogun, I would be completely fucked. So when I'd learned the truth that she was a gigalomaniac, I hadn't been horrified. If anything, I'd welcomed it. It's funny how, like, he thinks everybody's working for Shogun, and the irony is the one person that he, like, is the closest to is actually working for Shogun. Except she's kind of defying Shogun at the same time. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't a naive high schooler. She was my ally. One who even wielded the power to protect me from Shogun. That was why I wanted her to wake up so badly, and sooner rather than later. I'd get her to erase Senna's and Kozupi's corpses with her delusion powers. And when she did that, the police would no longer be able to get us. Nobody had found their bodies yet, right? Holding back my urge to throw up, I looked at the door. Kozupi's bloody corpse was just outside, and therefore unlikely to be found. But Senna's wasn't. Senna had fallen off the roof, meaning someone could easily stumble upon what was left of her. It'd be the end if that happened. Seeing how Remy wasn't waking up, I'd have to cover up their bodies somehow. Just the mere prospect terrified me. I didn't want to even look at someone's corpse, and that wasn't even mentioning the fact I knew them, which made it so much worse. Even so, I desperately shook away my fears, and then I went outside. I had to ensure Mai and Remy's safety. Maybe the body will be gone when he looks outside? It was already dark out, leaving my surroundings very dim. I didn't even have the moon to help. The clouds were hiding it. Straining my eyes, I looked over to where Kozupi was lying. Huh? But I couldn't find it. I couldn't find Kozupi's tragic corpse. There was still a pool of blood, so I couldn't laugh it off as it was just all a dream plot twist, but her corpse was completely gone. What the? Starting to get really confused, I stuck my head over the edge of the roof and peered down at the street below. There was no one there. Senna's corpse wasn't there either. There was clearly something down there, something I immediately understood to be a pool of blood. But that was it. No people, no corpse, nobody freaking out, nothing. Where had her corpse gone? The corpse had definitely been there after Remy had lost consciousness, so Remy couldn't have erased it with her gigalomaniac powers. Gee, I wonder who could have done it. But then, who could have? Ayase? No, she was still hospitalized in Yoyogi. Then Shogun? But he was my enemy. There was no way he'd ever do something that would have benefited me. What the hell was going on? Feeling both vaguely anxious and incredibly relieved about the corpses disappearing, I let out a deep sigh. Then I felt chills on the nape of my neck. I was being watched. It was the usual mysterious gaze. Shogun, is that you watching me?
僕を見るな。
I ducked into my room.
Huh?
Oh, is Remy? Oh, hello. Remy had gotten up. She was looking around the room with a vacant expression on her face. I guess she'd finally woken up, but what should I say to her? Killing Senna and Kozupi had been a pretty extreme shock to her. Then again, it was bound to happen if you killed someone. It wasn't like PKing an ESO. She'd also said she didn't mean to, and I was sure that only made it worse. I didn't know what to say at a time like this, so in the end, I couldn't help but say nothing. Remy looked at me, then tilted her head curiously.
ここ、どこかな？
え？
あなたは
Oh boy.
誰？
Remy was acting strange.
リミどうしちゃったの？
リミ？リミって誰だろう？
Now, Chorus can't have one of these types of games without some sort of, oh my gosh, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like, where they lose all their memories.
私かな？私、リミじゃないよ。
何言ってるんだよ。しっかりしてよ。
私の名前は。
Did, like, Shogun somehow, like, reset her completely?
わかんないや。
嘘でしょ。嘘だよね。
I pressed her for an answer.
本当だよ。
I don't know if Shogun did this or if, like, this is her, like, she blue screen. She just completely reset because she couldn't handle what she had done. Right when she'd said that, Remy jumped into my arms and started clinging to me. She rubbed her cheeks against mine like some spoiled kid wanting attention. Having her so close to me, and so suddenly at that, I started panicking.
あなた、誰？私のお友達かな？
Oh, please tell me the rest of this isn't going to be in my container room like it was with the Nanami one.
お友達ってね、つまりね、私に親切にしてくれる人のこと。あなたは怒らない？私、怒られるのやだ。あとね、痛いのも、すごくやだな。
That's the word I was thinking of. Amnesia, or maybe even some form of age regression? I thought this kind of thing only happened in Eroge. I would have never even dreamed of actually running into a situation like this in real life. Oh, Takumi, don't be weird about this. I hate the idea of, like, he's got this cute girl who has no memories apparently and is being overly affectionate, maybe is even like age regressed, like he says, like, how can I use this to my advantage? But that was only a possibility. The sheer amount Remy had freaked out when she killed Kozupi wasn't normal. And
ギガロマニアックスとなったものは誰だろうと一度は壊れているんだよ。
I remembered the late Senna's words. Remy might have broken once again. She killed her own heart and mind. Suddenly, those words came to mind. I couldn't quite remember where, but I had a feeling someone had told me that before. If Remy had killed her own mind from the shock of having killed Kozupi and Senna, and I was talking to an entirely new personality she'd created, I could understand why she was acting like a child. DID, dissociative identity disorder, also known as multiple personalities. Yua had accused me of having it. Obviously I didn't, but maybe Remy was suffering from it now. This was all just speculation, of course. What I did know, though, was the childlike Remy in front of me now was nothing like the Remy I knew. She wasn't the same girl who told me she'd stay by my side. The girl whose kindness had enveloped me. She was completely different now. Now he's like, fuck, I gotta take care of her instead of her taking care of me. I fell to my knees on the spot. I was overwhelmed with despair. As Remy clung to me playfully, she peered at my face curiously. Her eyes were so serene, so beautiful. Purity overflowed from them. Purity that I couldn't stare back into. In a way, we were lucky that Senna's and Kozupi's corpses had disappeared, but if Remy was like this, of course, who was supposed to protect me now? That's all he can think of is just like himself. Remy, not that I knew whether or not to even call her that, had genuinely lost all of her memories. Or, I suppose you could call this Remy. You could say that this Remy didn't have memories at all. Yeah, it's like she just factory reset.
リミって言うの？
うん。そうだよ。崎畑リミ。
崎畑リミ。そうなんだ。
From the way she talked, you wouldn't think we were talking about her literal name.
あなたは？お名前、なんて言うのかな？
僕は西條匠。
Having to teach her something so basic, like day one stuff, was just... Thinking about where this was going to lead just left me feeling even worse than before.
西條匠。タクだね。
No? It was the same. Her nickname for me was the same.
ねえねえ、タク。あのね、私ね、手がベトベトしてるの。
The dried blood on her hands clung to her skin. Dark red discoloration on her was Kozupi's blood, or at least it should have been. Her corpse had vanished, but her blood still remained.
ベトベト。やだな。
Remy looked pretty sad as she stared at her hands. I was reminded of Kozupi's smile and was hit with a horrible ache in my chest. Trying my best to hold myself together, I got a wet towel ready for her.
ほら、手出して。
When I told her that, Remy timidly held out both of her hands. Using the towel, I started cleaning the blood off of them. Every time I glanced at it, the previously white towel got redder and redder. To make sure I got it all off, I had to scrub kind of hard. As I wiped away the blood, making sure to get even between her fingers. Remy laughed cheerfully. She must have had no idea why she had blood on her hands. Well, wasn't she fucking acting carefree? You know what? Clean them yourself. Why should I have to babysit you? But there was no way I could actually say that. Remy had tried her best to protect me, and because of that, regardless of whether or not it had been intentional, she'd killed someone. And then her heart and mind had broken completely. So I couldn't just leave her to fend for herself. After all, I was also responsible for her... Well, look at him actually taking some responsibility for it. I was also responsible for her being like this.
ほら、綺麗になったよ。
ありがとう。ピカピカだ。私の手。すっきりしたよ。
She took my hands, intertwined her fingers with mine, then innocently shook them up and down. She seemed so happy. It was like she was a little kid. For some reason, her smile left me feeling wistful.
ねえ、リミ、君は僕を守ってくれる？
I love it. Like, she's literally like being like a child. I bet she doesn't even remember how to use her D sword, and he's still, all he can think of is like her protecting him.
守る？何を？
僕を。
私ね、よくわかんない。でもね、タコは私のお友達だから、私に親切にしてくれるよね。だからね、私、タコがいてくれてよかったよ。
It was no use. There was no point talking to her anymore. The Remy who was supposed to protect me wasn't there anymore. I hung my head. Remy wasn't supposed to be here. Where was her house? She needed to get home. I thought of reaching out to her family, but I couldn't find anything among her stuff with her contact information. If I went to school, the teachers there would most likely know her address. The problem was it was already fairly late, so I probably wouldn't be able to get in to ask. Actually, now that I thought about it, I didn't really know much about Remy. Where did she live? How big was her family? When was her birthday? What was her favorite food? I didn't know anything about her, and because of that, there was nothing I could do for her.
タク、タク。
Remy called my name as she pulled on the hem of my shirt.
ねえねえ、タク。私ね、お腹ペコペコ。
What time was it? It was already dark outside, and also dinner time. Unfortunately, I didn't have any spare food here. I would have to go buy something.
何が食べたい？
Had she also forgotten about food due to her memory loss? Did she not know what different kinds of foods there were? What they tasted like?
そうだ。ね、私、お蕎麦が食べたい。
お蕎麦？
お蕎麦好き。
好きなの？
好き。
なんで？食べたことあるの？
食べたこと。
So maybe he's like, okay, so she's got some, like, deep down, she's got some memories of who she used to be. Maybe. He has no idea if she actually likes soba. But maybe he's like, maybe we can work with this.
でもね、お蕎麦は好きだよ。
What was going on? Was she starting to regain her memories? Or was her previous self's sense of taste the only thing she remembered? If she got her memories back, I'd be saved. For the time being, though, I had to go to the supermarket to buy some soba.
リミ、ここで待ってて。絶対外に出ちゃダメだ。はーい。ミシ
I tentatively struck the pose the previous Remy had done all this time. I put one hand up against my head, as if I were saluting her. Maybe this would make Remy remember? That was my train of thought, at least, but...
石？何？かっこいいね。
She had no idea what I was doing. Her eyes were sparkling with curiosity, not recognition. So, incredibly embarrassed, I bolted out of the room. I would have loved to see him do that. On the way to the supermarket, I checked to see if the police were around or not. Just as I thought, Sena and Kozupi's corpses had disappeared. If there were any police around, then it was possible there'd been witnesses. But if there weren't, then that would mean no one had found them. In other words, we might have had some time before we were found out. Of course, I wasn't just wary of the police, but Shogun too. He could show up completely out of nowhere at any time, so I paid extremely close attention to any shadows where he could have been lurking. Thankfully, I didn't feel God's gaze at the moment. But even still, I didn't want to go out at night. The darkness scared me. And when I walked through the deepest parts of that darkness, I could faintly see the scene of the dead Kozupi and Sena starting to form. Their bodies, mutilated and disfigured, slowly took shape. I quickly averted my eyes and hurried to the supermarket, keeping my eyes trained on my feet. Once I got back to my base, I got the portable stove and started boiling the water for the soba. My container didn't exactly have any form of ventilation, and there was flammable shit everywhere, so it was honestly pretty dangerous. Regardless, I went ahead and tossed the soba into the pot. Instant noodles, of course. Rimi was staring at the noodles with a spark of curiosity in her eyes.
お蕎麦ってこうやって作るんだね。
Kozapi's pool of blood was still there. It's practically all dried up now, and since it was nighttime, it just looked like some weird black stain. I broke down all the empty cardboard boxes I piled up and set them over the top of it. I knew it wouldn't solve the problem, but I still didn't want to see it if I could help it.
タク、こぼれそうだよ。
When I heard her say that, I went back to check the stove. It was boiling pretty intensely, and it was on the brink of overflowing. But instead of doing anything about it, she just kept saying, "Whoa!"
火を消して。
Rimi tilted her head, then turned the dial on the stove the wrong way.
溢れたよ。すごい。
いや、すごいじゃないでしょ。
I frantically pushed Rimi aside and turned off the burner. There was hot water everywhere. It shouldn't have really mattered. As long as it was edible, she shouldn't have cared too much about how it tasted or its texture. So I took the pot, drained the water from it, and immediately rinsed the soba noodles. Though it was worth noting I'd only done so because the instructions told me to, not because I was some master soba chef.
冷やしとあったかいのとどっちがいい？
冷たいの。
I plopped the noodles into a bowl, then poured in the base I'd bought as well. All I had for toppings was some green onion. I chopped it up to make a decent garnish, and then it was ready to go. I took Rimi back to my room in a hurry. I'd leave the cleaning for tomorrow when it was bright outside. But right now, I wanted to spend as little time as possible outside, especially since there was still the faint smell of blood out there. It felt as if Senna and Kozapi could show up even now. They'd be drenched in blood, and then they'd start walking toward me like zombies. Sure, that was more based in a cult than reality, but it still scared me nonetheless.
ねえタク、食べていい？食べていい？
It was pretty clear that Rimi didn't have any of the intense worries I had. Actually, maybe it was precisely because of those things that she'd changed to an entirely new personality, in order to completely erase the memory of having killed people.
どうぞ。
いただきます。
She then grabbed the chopsticks I'd given her. She was holding them like they were a fork, and instead of using them, she stuck her mouth on the edge of the bowl and started slurping it up directly. Yeah, I don't care what anyone says. That's how a lolly eats. Thank you very much. She must have even forgotten how to hold chopsticks correctly. She'd also forgotten that's how soba was made and how to turn off a simple stove. And yet, she had remembered it was polite to thank people for making stuff for you. Maybe that meant her understanding of the world around her had regressed.
食べられないよ。
え？
食べられない。
Rimi was getting frustrated at her own inability to properly eat the soba. And I mean, considering how she was trying to go about it, of course she wouldn't be able to.
食べさせて。
Oh my god, this is turning into like one of his weird eroges. Was she for real? She was asking me to feed her? I felt like I was her babysitter at this point, or perhaps a dad. But having a daughter the same age as me? Oh god, I didn't know if I could handle that.
タク。
She pleaded with her puppy dog eyes, and since I couldn't really say no to those, I let out a sigh and gave in.
ほら、あーんして。
Rimi took the soba I was holding out to her in her mouth and started chewing it with a smile on her face. She seemed to really like it.
おいしいよ。
それはよかった。
Suddenly, a thought crossed my mind. Not a bad thought, not a dirty thought. Come on, man. A laid-back, relaxing life with a 3D girl. That was definitely what I was looking for. A life with no overly dramatic eroge-esque plot points. Not having to worry about the heroine's emotional baggage. Not worrying about having feelings for each other yet, being too afraid to speak up. And not having to worry about getting dragged into a murder case. A life you wouldn't find in books or video games. And yet, I had a feeling that was what I really wanted. And that very life was actually unfolding right before my very eyes. Not only that, but Rimi was here with me too. Being honest with myself, Rimi was cute. She'd also said she'd protect me. And I too wanted to stay with her, forever if I could. But this was all fake, a lie. This life wouldn't last. And Rimi wasn't Rimi. Our time would be far too short-lived, far too fleeting. The thought of it made me feel sad, wistful, and empty. This is very different from some of the other endings where he just kind of gave into the delusion. Even though he knew, like, it deep down it wasn't real. Here, it's like he's having the pangs of, like, I know this isn't real, and this is just escapism.
戻ってきてよ。リミ、本当に戻ってくれ。
I couldn't help but whisper those words.
メールだよボケナス
I was taken by surprise. I'd heard Seraton's voice come from my PC. I just received an email from someone. Was it from Shogun? I had a bad feeling about this. This couldn't be good. I didn't want to look. Oh, what if it's like an email, like Shogun knows what happens? Maybe it's an email from Senna and Kozupi being like, you killed us. I felt the gaze. Someone was looking at me. It felt even more evident than usual. I looked around me, but there was no one besides me and Rimi in the room. My hand had stopped, and because of that, Rimi was fighting hard to try and wrestle the soba into her mouth. She wasn't looking at me, which meant that there was no one else it could have possibly been. I didn't even need to ask whose eyes are those eyes. Groaning, I headed for the PC and checked my inbox. Awaken, Shogun. I'd only received one email, and the sender was Shogun. And Rimi is in no position to try and stop this from happening. What was he plotting now? Was he going to kidnap Nanami for real this time instead of just faking it? Or maybe he was finally going to come and kill me directly once and for all. The fear made all my hair stand on end. The chills on the nape of my neck grew even stronger. I didn't feel any good, and my head was starting to hurt. Don't look at me. With trembling fingers, I clicked the mouse and opened the email.
あれ
There was nothing written in it. It was only the subject line, which read, Awaken. There was nothing written in the body. Awaken. What did he mean by that? Was he telling me to awaken as a gigalomaniac? He had to be fucking kidding me. I had a feeling he'd said something similar the first time we'd met.
バカにして僕を怯えさせてそんなに楽しいか
I was angry, but at the same time, I wanted to fend off the fear lurking deep inside me. I hit the keyboard hard with my hands. Static came from the speakers. Had I clicked something by accident?
目覚めて
I'd heard something. Mixed in with all the static, I'd heard something. I hurriedly checked my PC. The MP3 player wasn't running, and there weren't any videos playing in my browser. I thought maybe Shogun's email had included some kind of virus, but there was no files attached to it.
時間がないんだ
Again, I'd heard it. It was getting hard to breathe. Drops of sweat ran down my forehead. Oh, I could just turn off the sound. If I did that, I'd stop hearing this extremely weird static. I opened the sound settings in the bottom right corner with the mouse. Then I checked the option to mute everything in the volume mixer. Once I did that, I wouldn't hear anything. I wouldn't have to listen to the static, or anything resembling a voice within the static. I was extremely tired, freaked out. Of course I was. It'd only been 2 hours since 2 people I knew had died right in front of me. Not to mention the weird stuff I'd seen at the hospital when I'd gone to visit Ayase, or the strange calls from Nanami. So I had to just be mishearing something, and amid the static,
目覚めて
a voice
時間がないんだ
was coming from the speaker.
もうすぐサードメルトが起き
I clearly heard it. It was him. That had been Shogun's voice. The same voice that talked to me at Scramble Crossing.
なんでだよミュートにしたはずだろ
タク
Turd melt.
何
Rimi, acting just as she had been for the past couple of hours, tilted her head as she looked at me with innocent eyes. I came up close to her, grabbed her by the shoulders, and shook them.
リミ頼むよしっかりしてよ
痛いよ
言ってくれ 僕を守るって言ってくれよ。僕は一人じゃ耐えられない。このままじゃ殺される。
痛くしないで。
僕は君を責めないから。君がいてくれないと困るんだ。だから。
痛いの。やだ。
Tears trickled down her face. I was scaring her. Every couple of seconds, her shoulders trembled. I slowly let go of her.
無用。目を覚まし。
Uh-oh. Well, too late. The floor started shaking violently. An earthquake. It was bigger than the last one. I was struck with a violent ringing in my ears. It was such an intensely shrill, resonant sound, my head felt like it was about to burst open. It felt like my ears were being pierced by thousands upon thousands of needles, as though my brain was being stirred into mush by a blender. And then... I was hit by an enormous impact, and a blinding light dyed my vision completely white. I was awash with an elusive feeling of being immersed in lukewarm water. The waves gently rocked me back and forth as I drifted along its surface. As I slowly opened my eyes, a vibrant blue sky spread out before me. Now this could be either Takumi or Rimi, because Rimi sees the sky sometimes. It feels almost like I could fall into it. It was a rather strange sky. The sun was nowhere to be seen. Even though I was supposed to be in my room... Okay, this is Takumi. Even though it was supposed to be nighttime. When could I have possibly gone outside? When could it have possibly turned to day? With the last earthquake, I'd been out for more than an hour. Maybe this time, I had been unconscious for the entire night, I thought to myself. I remembered the earthquake's tremendous impact. Yet another elusive feeling hit me, like the tremors were resonating with the very blood coursing through my veins, threatening to burst open from the inside. Maybe this was heaven. Maybe I died in the earthquake. Heaven, huh? There was no way an otaku freak like me would go to heaven. It wasn't even mentioning how I hadn't even been able to save my own little sister. How I'd been the worst possible brother to her. How I'd made Rimi kill Senna and Kozapi. Hell would be a far more fitting place for someone like me. Although, obviously, I'd choose heaven if I could. My body didn't feel quite right. I felt like I was being overwhelmed with the sensation of walking on top of a fluffy cloud. I couldn't quite understand it. But, regardless of how I felt, I forced myself to get up. Feeling of being rocked by the waves hadn't simply been my imagination after all. This was a world with a never-ending surface of crystal-clear water. A world where, no matter where I looked, blue filled my view. And I'd been right in the middle of it, lying down. Where was I? Was this really heaven? But I felt like I'd seen the scenery before.
あの空はどこにあるの?
A voice resounded within my mind, a voice which rose from the depths of my memories. Right, I remembered now. I'd seen it in a dream before. Rimi had been there. I talked to her as she looked up at the blue sky, her face clearly one of holding back tears. Was I seeing the same dreams I had back then? But, no matter where I looked, there was no one other than me. There was no one here, not even Rimi. It was far too reposeful. Rimi? I tried calling her name, but my words were entirely mute. And yet, even without sound, they created ripples across the calm surface of water. Are you there? Sound was a series of vibrations, and those vibrations, in turn, created waves. Among those waves, just like I'd been a few moments ago, there was someone lying down. I stood up, my field of view expanded. The one drifting along the waves was Rimi. She was so unbelievably pale. She appeared as if she was dead. Her eyes were closed, and both of her hands were resting gently on her chest. And she simply stayed that way, facing up to the sky, not moving even a single inch. Rimi, wake up! Even though I called out to her, she didn't react. She was dead. I knew that for certain. But it wasn't just her. The world itself was dead. And so I just stood there, not knowing what to do. Right at that very moment, Rimi's prone body gradually sank beneath the surface of water. As soon as I realized what was happening, she was already completely submerged. How was I standing on top of water at all, I wondered? Curious, I fixed my gaze below the water's surface. Beyond it, there was only darkness. The sky was so bright, and yet, even though the water was so clear, below it there was only an eternal darkness that seemed to swallow all, and Rimi, still lying on her back, was slowly sinking farther and farther into its depths. I had to go after her. I needed to wake her up. But as soon as that thought crossed my mind, even though I'd been able to stand on water until then, all support suddenly disappeared out from under me. I sank. My body grew heavier with each passing sound. It was like I was underwater, but it wasn't as though I couldn't breathe. The water was very warm, too. I just wanted to drift within this comfortable sensation for all eternity. That was the way it made me feel. If I had to give an example, rather than ocean water, it was more like amniotic fluid. This very well might have been how a fetus felt inside its mother's womb. I thought the darkness continued forever, but in truth there was a bottom to it. It was so dark I couldn't even see my feet. I simply felt an odd, sticky sensation on my soles. I stood in the middle of the darkness. I wonder if the sticky sensation is blood. When I looked up, I found I could no longer see the surface. That blue sky, too, had been veiled completely by the darkness. The sole source of light was a single ray that descended down from above like a thin thread. Much like a spotlight would, it pointed to a single place. And yet, unlike a spotlight, there was nothing beneath it to be illuminated. It only lit up a meaningless spot. Nervously, I stepped into the light. It was ever so faint and gentle, but the moment I bathed in it, my chest began to ache. What was the sensation? It felt almost as if I could cry at a moment's notice, as if my heart itself was being rended. That was the sensation that overtook me. Where could Rimi be right now after sinking all the way down here? Relying on the faint light source alone, I made my way out from beneath the spot of light and searched through the darkness. Soon my toes hit something soft and yielding. I kneeled down and this time tried touching it with my hand. What I felt was so cold it was capable of freezing my very fingertips. Little by little, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and before long I realized something. I was touching a person lying collapsed on the ground. Rimi. Wake up. I tried shaking her. Rimi, wake up. But there was no reaction. She wasn't breathing. Taking her feeble hand, I measured her pulse. She was dead. She had no pulse whatsoever. Dismayed, I strained my eyes to examine the surrounding darkness, only to find she wasn't the only one. Oh, that's right, there was a thing of like multiple Rimis. Countless other Rimis were collapsed on the ground, almost as if this place were a burial ground. I wonder if all these Rimis, like, if they represent different attempts, like the different endings I did, where she tried to stop this from happening and then it didn't succeed. But there was something at the beginning, right? Like, or not the beginning, but one of the playthroughs where it showed multiple Rimis when she was, like, being tortured to awaken herself. I don't remember too much about it, though. Every single one of them was dead. This was a graveyard, the graveyard of her heart. That was how it felt to me. Suddenly, countless bubbles sprang forth before my eyes, and with each and every one of them I could see a different I could see different visions being displayed. An instinctive realization came to me, and I knew then that these were Rimi's dead memories.
"私の最初の記憶は、落ちてくる雨と、空を覆い隠した、どんよりとした雲。
How long ago had that been? It was around the time I was just an elementary schooler, maybe 6 years ago? It didn't matter when it happened, for my memories were not continuous. In it, I saw my dad, whose head had been blown away, and my mom, who had been crushed completely by steel right next to me. Even though only a moment prior, we had all been celebrating inside the car, happy as could be, about our family trip. An enormous truck had closed in on us, and before I even knew what was happening, the car I'd been in had been completely flattened. I had then been struck by an intense pain, and my consciousness began to grow blurry. Feeling as if my very body was being torn apart, the sharp squeal of brakes played an endless refrain for my ears. Alright, we're finally getting into, like, Rimi's backstory. We've seen glimpses of
次
like
の記憶は
her in the past, but
手
not
術台
much.
の上から見た眩しい光と男の人の声。
I wondered how long ago that was. It was right after losing my parents, maybe 5 years ago. It didn't matter when it had happened, for my memories were not continuous.
担当医に剣のようなものが見えたと言ったそうですね。聞こえていますか？さん。
I had a feeling someone had called my name, but I could no longer recall what exactly that name was, for it was now a dead name.
まだ傷が癒えていないようですね。ご両親が目の前で亡くなったのもショックでしたか？では、聞いているだけで結構。私はこの AH 東京総合病院の名誉院長でありスポンサーでもあるノロセと言います。君はギガロマニアックスである可能性があります。ぜひその力に覚醒していただきたい。幸いにも君は天涯孤独になったので、親族などの煩わしい連中も湧いては来ない。というわけで、君は今日をもって死亡扱いとなりました。以後、この地下室で過ごしてもらいます。何の心配もいりません。ここは私しか知らない部屋ですから。頑張って目覚めてください。期待していますよ。君は実験台です。力を持つ非覚醒者を目覚めさせるためには何が必要か、いろいろと試させてもらいます。明日からね。
I continued to stare fixedly at the lights hanging from the ceiling, for I hated the dark more than anything.
次の記憶も手術台の上から見た眩しい光と男の人の声。
I wondered how long ago that was. Having been locked in the basement, I had lost all sense of time. It didn't matter when it had happened, for my memories were not continuous.
実に我慢強いお嬢さんですね、君は。背中の皮膚がただれて血が出ているのになぜ耐えようとするのです？早く目覚めれば楽になるというのに。
I continued to stare fixedly at the lights hanging from the ceiling, for if I did so, my vision would be rendered paralyzed, and it would soon all be over without me having to see anything more.
次の記憶も手術台の上から見た眩しい光と男の人の声。
I wondered how long ago that was. Having been locked in the basement, I'd lost all sense of time. It didn't matter when it had happened, for my memories were not continuous.
痛いですか？皮膚の表面を切るだけですよ。血はたくさん出ますが、死ぬほどではありません。3日も放置すれば、化膿してかゆみがひどいことになるでしょう。そこからが今回の実験の本番です。安心してください。私は医者なのでね、メスの扱いには慣れています。そうですね。10箇所ほど切り刻みましょうか。
I continued to stare fixedly at the lights hanging from the ceiling, for if I did so, my vision would be rendered paralyzed, and it would soon all be over without me having to see anything more.
次の記憶も手術台の上から見た眩しい光と 男の人の声。
I wondered how long ago that was. Having been locked in the basement, I'd lost all sense of time. It didn't matter when it happened, for my memories were not continuous. I wonder at what point she awakened, and she said about like Senna, about like the difference between someone who had been trained to use a sword versus like someone who's just a high schooler. So I'm guessing like Norose kind of treated her as if like the soldier, you know, he trained her how to use her sword.
そうですか。かゆいですか。しかし、引っかくことは許しませんよ。人というのは実に不思議なものでしてね。痛みは意外と我慢することができるのですが、かゆみはそうでもないのです。痛みよりもかゆみの方が精神をおかしくさせるには効果的かもしれませんね。
I continued to stare fixedly at the lights hanging from the ceiling, for if I did so, my vision would be rendered paralyzed, and it would soon all be over without me having to see anything more. And then I killed my own self. So that was the moment that she killed herself the first time.
次の記憶も、手術台の上から見た眩しい光と男の人の声。
I wondered how long ago that was. Having been locked in the basement, I'd lost all sense of time. It didn't matter when it happened, for my memories were not continuous.
Hmm. 左上腕はこれで粉砕骨折というところですか。まだ目覚めないとは、一体何が足りないのでしょうね。しょうがない。今日の実験はこれぐらいにしておきましょう。ゆっくり休んでください。
I continued to stare fixedly at the lights hanging from the ceiling, for if I did so, my vision would be rendered paralyzed, and it would soon all be over without me having to see anything more. And then I killed my own self. Yeah, these are all her different selves that we've seen. Oh my gosh, how much more of this is there gonna be?
次の記憶も、
I know it's to really show how much she went through and all the selves she's killed, but ugh, this is getting rough.
男の人の声。
I wondered how long ago that was. Having been locked in the basement, I'd lost all sense of time. It didn't matter when it happened, for my memories were not continuous. Oh, is he like waterboarding her?
ウォーターボーディングはアメリカ CIA がつい最近まで拷問方法として用いていた最も安易で最も効果的で最も苦しませることができる技術です。
Waterboarding. Oh boy, there's a lot of stuff I haven't seen here. Autistic mode? Autism is a neurological condition characterized by atypical communication and language development. In various Japanese sci-fi media, the term autistic mode was adopted in order to describe a situation in which all communication is shut off, rendering the entity completely isolated from the rest of the world. Featured in the sci-fi manga that popularized this term, cybernetically enhanced brains are one such entity. Alright, debugging, IC card. Okay. Waterboarding. Man, how did I miss those before? A method of torture is performed by pouring water directly into the nose and mouth of a person who's lying on their back, with their legs elevated and fixed above their head. This creates an illusion in which the victim feels that they are both suffocating and drowning. As the illusion of drowning does not actually inflict pain, nor causes physical injury, the United States argues that waterboarding does not constitute cruel torture as defined and prohibited by the Geneva Conventions.
いわゆる水攻めというものですね。わずかな水の量だけで あなたに溺死した錯覚を味わわせることができるのですよ。21世紀において未だにこのような古典的な拷問を行っている。実に面白いではありませんか。
I continued to stare fixedly at the lights hanging from the ceiling, for if I did so, my vision would be rendered paralyzed, and it would soon all be over without me having to see anything more. And then I killed my own self.
次の記憶も手術台の上から見た眩しい光と男の人の声。
I wondered how long ago that was. Having been locked in the basement, I'd lost all sense of time. It didn't matter when it had happened, for my memories were not continuous.
私は麻酔を扱うのはこれが初めてなのですが、どうやらうまくいったようですね。気分はいかがですか？君は今、首から下が麻痺している状態です。自分の体を思うままに動かせないというのは、ストレスのたまることだと思いませんか？とりあえず、その状態で1年ほど過ごしてみましょう。
Oh, wow.
1日に1度、点滴で栄養を与えますから、心配はいりません。では、良いお年を。
Does she have to stare up at the light the whole time? When so, I mean, I guess she can close her eyes. She's paralyzed from the waist down, or the neck down, but I continued to stare fixedly at the lights hanging from the ceiling. For if I did so, my vision would be rendered paralyzed, and it would soon all be over without me having to see anything more. As I remained there, I felt like I saw something amid the white light, something that looked almost like a pair of wings. And then I killed my own self.
次の記憶は手術台の上から見た眩しい光だけ。
I wondered how long ago that was. Having been locked in the basement, I'd lost all sense of time. It didn't matter when it had happened, for my memories were not continuous. No matter how many times I called out, no one came for me. Nothing moved, and I couldn't move anything, not even a twitch of the finger. I simply stared vacantly at the light hanging from the ceiling. There was nothing else I could do. As I remained there, I felt like I saw something amid the white light, something that looked almost like feathers fluttering about. And then I killed my own self.
「次の記憶も手術台の上から見た眩しい光だけ。
I wondered how long ago that was. Having been locked in the basement, I'd lost all sense of time. It didn't matter when it had happened, for my memories were not continuous. Okay, that was just... Okay, it's just the same thing over and over again. I'm like, now I'm like,
次の記憶
is this
は
meant to happen like this?
手術台
Or
の上から見た
it's like I'm
眩
stuck
しい
in a
光
loop?
と男の人の
I'm just
声。
gonna skip ahead until something new happens. Until she sees... Oh, here we go. Here's something new.
1年もの間、そこで横たわっていた気分はどうですか？己の糞便にまみれ、骨と皮だけの姿となり、尊厳を奪われた気分はどうだったのかと聞いているのです。ですが安心してください。殺しはしませんよ。この実験が始まってそろそろ3年になりますか。私はね、君のことが愛おしくてたまらない。 かけがえのない存在ですよ、君は。
Ew.
ギガロマニアックスを強制的に覚醒させることはとても難しく時間がかかる。ですが、君には早く目覚めてもらいたいのです。期待していますよ。
I continued to stare fixedly at the lights hanging from the ceiling. For if I did so, my vision would be rendered paralyzed, and it would soon all be over without me having to see anything more. What if her name wasn't even Rimi? What if she just, like, that's the name she was given? As I remained there, I felt like I saw something that almost looked like feathers fluttering down together with a pair of wings. And then I killed my own self. What number was my current self? Oh my gosh, that was rough to get through. That's enough. Make it stop, please. To think there was such a tragic past behind Rimi's smile. I took one of Rimi's corpses that was lying on the ground and brought it close to my chest. It was terribly cold, and I could tell it was devoid of a soul. But even so, I needed her. I want you here with me, Rimi. I then wished and crafted a delusion. Wake up, please. Wake up, Rimi. You're the only one who can save me. I know this is selfish of me, but I need you to protect me. I know this is presumptuous of me, but even though I'm a total loser, I feel like I can change if I'm with you. So please, wake up, Rimi. The next thing I knew, I found myself in the blue-filled world once again. Waves ran across the surface of water, and then slowly rising up from the depths were countless Rimis. Every one of them had their eyes closed and were standing still as could be on top of the water. Eventually, they started moving. However, they didn't do so using their legs, but simply glided across the water. One Rimi then overlapped with another, and that same one overlapped with yet another one. The Rimis are merging together. Dumbfounded, I just stood there and watched. Eventually, there were only 4 of them left, then 2. And then the last 2 Rimi slowly melded together and became one. Her eyes opened, and then she looked at me, still kind of dead in the eyes, though. Could this Rimi have been the one I knew? That Rimi? Or was it an entirely different one? I didn't know. I was afraid to call her name, so I waited for her to say something. But instead of speaking, she showed me a warm smile. Raising her hand to her head, she struck her usual pose. Rimi nodded, and then she embraced me. I buried my face in her chest. The feeling of her soft, supple breast spread across my cheeks. Gravity soon disappeared, and the 2 of us began drifting along the blue. With her still lying on the ground, Rimi held me as she gently stroked my hair. I couldn't describe how wonderful that felt. It was as if the very essence of all her kindness and warmth were enveloping me. It reminded me of how I felt when my mom hugged me back when I was a kid, how safe I'd felt in her arms. I wanted to stay like this forever, but at the same time, I wanted to confirm for myself that she really was Rimi. So I turned my head just long enough to look at her. Even with that horrific past behind her, she still had the brightest smile. Rimi, despite looking like she was about to cry, still made an effort to show a smile. She entwined her fingers with my hair.
キスしようか。
What is this ending? What is happening right now? Before I knew it, my chin had forcibly been raised slightly. A captivating aroma filled me, and something warm and tender pressed up against my lips. Right before me was her face. Her eyes were closed. I can feel her soft breaths. So this was a kiss. So sweet and so pleasant. It felt like my brain itself was turning to mush. From just a kiss alone, my heart was filled with love for her. An otaku freak like me depended on her, so, yet even still, desired her everything. I closed my eyes and engraved that sensation into my memories. Are they going to be snapping back to reality at some point? Okay, there they are. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in my room. Rimi was lying down on the floor with me, still in her embrace. Slowly, she parted from my lips.
ただいま。
うん。
Rimi was acting shy, something I found incredibly cute. Our eyes met. The two of us were blushing. Had girls' bodies always been this soft? Huh, 3D for the win. Finally, even I got a real girlfriend. Nobody would ever call me an unpopular freak ever again. Or an unpopular otaku freak again.
約束したもんね。タクを守るって。
僕を守ってくれる。
守るよ。タクも、タクミも、ナナちゃんも。
Yeah, where is Nanami? What's happened to Nanami? What was she trying to say? Ignoring my confusion, Rimi averted her gaze from me and looked up at the ceiling.
前は、タクミに心を救ってもらって、今度は、タクに心を助けてもらって。だから、今度こそ、私があなたたちを守る。
So I wonder if the true ending, it's similar like maybe to Steins Gate, where it's like everything lines up perfectly in a way that she'll actually be able to protect Taku. Taku will be able to awaken, stop Noah 2 from happening, and save the original Takumi as well. I still didn't understand what she meant by Taku and Takumi, but what I did know was if she were there to protect me, I wouldn't need to worry about anything anymore. She was a gigalomaniac, and she would keep me safe. No matter what Shogun had asked her to do, she'd be able to pull it off. As long as I was with her, that'd be enough for me.
私、頑張るね。頑張って、罪滅ぼしもするし、あなたたちからの恩にも報いるから。
Atoning for her sins? Was she talking about what had she done to Senna and Kozupi? But that had been legitimate self-defense. She hadn't had a choice, and that should have been how she thought about it. But what felt far more strange to me was how she'd said, "you both." Who else did she mean?
だから今は、眠って、タク。
I could feel the vibrations coming from her body at her every word. Even now, her fingers were still stroking my hair. I felt so at peace, and so very sleepy. Reveling in the happiness of falling asleep in her arms, I closed my eyes. By the time Sakihata Rimi had left the container, the world around her had changed beyond recognition. A city of death. That was the most fitting description. Countless buildings littering her surroundings had collapsed, and those that had avoided such a fate had deep cracks ripping through them.
サードメルト。これほどだなんて。
手遅れだったよ。野呂瀬源一は予定より早くノア2を本格的に稼働させた。
Following that voice, a boy in a wheelchair appeared before her. This old building was not wheelchair accessible, and yet, despite the fact that it should have been impossible for someone in a wheelchair to ascend to the roof on their own, there he sat. But Rami showed no signs of being surprised by his appearance.
元の君に戻ったみたいだね。
元の私なんていないよ。どっちかっていうと、タクが望んだ私に戻ったっていう感じ。タクがそう望んでくれたことはさ、 すごく嬉しかったけどね。
彼はまた理想度なしで力を使った。もう少し追い込めば覚醒できる。
タクのことはそっとしておいてあげて。
Cutting his words short, Remy spoke with an intense conviction.
ノア2は私が何とかする。ナナちゃんも私が助ける。あなたも死なせないよ。
君一人じゃノロセに対抗はできない。それに前から言っているけど、君は普通に生きるべきなんだ。
タクとね、約束したんだ。
Looking up to the overcast clouds, Remy gave a fleeting smile.
私がタクのこと守るって。だから行くね。リシー。
リミ。
Walking past the boy in the wheelchair, Remy proceeded down the stairs, and the boy, deciding not to follow her, or rather being unable to, sank deeply into his wheelchair and let out a great sigh.
自分を犠牲にするつもりなの、リミ。
Noah, too, the bringer of calamity, or perhaps the creator of a utopia for humanity. Whichever it was, it meant nothing to Remy. Whichever it was something Remy had to destroy. Noah, too,'s location was already a known fact to her. A mutual recognition, silently yet tactfully planted into the people's consciousness. Despite it being right in front of Shibuya Station, despite the building having been demolished years ago, it was there with none suspecting a thing. No one even tried to go inside. Remy opened the door toward the former planetarium, where no other signs of human presence could be found, and stepped inside. Remy's eyes went wide at the scene she saw before her. There stood a device that was beyond enormous. Enshrined in the center of the dome-shaped room, it could be described only as a monster. An ominous sound rang faintly throughout the spacious room. It was a low-pitched noise akin to the deep growl of a beast, a sound that signified the device's operation. Noah, too. Nishijo Nanami was being held captive right next to the device. Her uniform was torn, and a bandage soaked with blood was wrapped around her right wrist. Her head hung toward the floor, and she looked terribly, terribly pale. Faced with such a pitiful sight, Remy was at a loss for words. Crucified in Jesus of Nazareth's likeness. No, what held her now could not be called a cross. It was something far different, for it took the shape of pure, unadulterated malice. The entirety of this world's evil, the entirety of this world's disorder, the entirety of this world's immortality. Gosh, immorality. Why am I having trouble speaking? It'd be no exaggeration to refer to it as a symbol sculpted to those very attributes. Keeping her guard up, Remy swiftly checked her surroundings. There was no one else there besides Nanami. She found no traces of the man who had prompted the development of Noah 2, the man who had performed ruthless, torturous experiments on her, Norose Genshi. Although surprised by that fact, Remy prioritized Nanami's rescue and ran toward the tableau, crucifying her.
Nana-chan, しっかり。
Lowering Nanami from the tableau, Remy sighed in relief after confirming she was still breathing. First and foremost, she had to get Nanami somewhere safe. To achieve this end, Remy went to pick her up. However... Oh! Whoa, was that Nanami attacking her, or was that Norose? An intense pain surged in her back, as if something was gouging out her very flesh. Remy vomited blood that stained Nanami's uniform.
久々の再会だというのに、私には挨拶もなしですか?
Enduring the pain, Remy turned her head. Narose Genichi was standing right behind her, and in his hand was the tableau that had been clasping Nanami only a moment ago. However, it was not a tableau but a sword, Narose Genichi's sword. That very blade was now piercing through her body. Norose slowly drew his hand back. The sharp blade of his D-sword bored into her body, slid through her flesh, and scraped against the surface of her bones. Her body arched in involuntary spasms, spurred on by the sharp, agonizing pain as her body was slowly being sliced apart. At last, Norose's sword released her. A torrent of blood came gushing free. Every nerve in her body was screaming out in agony. Even now, she felt as if she was about to pass out from the sheer pain.
その娘は西条匠をおびき寄せる貴重な餌なのです。勝手に連れて行かれては困りますね。
Rimi was well aware of the magnitude of Norose's power as a gigalomaniac. She had been imprisoned by the man for over 3 years after all. In a fair fight, she'd not stand a chance, and in this situation, he would never let her go. The mere idea of doing so would have been unfathomable to him. At the very least, I have to make sure Nana-chan escapes. The taste of blood spread through her mouth. She was continually assailed by the fierce urge to vomit. The open wound on her back was hot, as if seared by flame. The sheer pain coursing through her left her unable to move. Blood was still rushing out without pause. It felt as if her consciousness was about to be severed. It was so terribly cold. Her eyes grew hazy, and amid her fading vision, she saw what resembled a scornful smile forming on Norose's face. This might be it for me. Rimi couldn't envision a delusion in which she managed to escape from this man's clutches. Only despair governed her heart.
僕の力をあげるよ。
It was a voice Rimi knew very well, Nishijo Takumi, or the boy presenting himself as Shogun. The voice came from a distant place. If defined, it was in a manner akin to thought transference. In other words, telepathy, a feat made only possible by gigalomania.
僕の最後の妄想を君に。
匠。
君にこんな辛い役目を任せてしまってごめん。もう余計なことは言わない。君の意志を曲げることは無理だって分かったから。死ぬつもりなんだね。
If there was a way to fix things without dying, I would have done it.
彼が目覚めなかった以上、僕にはどうすることもできない。だからせめて、僕の最後の妄想を君に。
何言ってるの？あなたはそんなことしなくても。
Even though he had no presence in this place, Rimi shouted at the person she was speaking to.
君だけを死なせるわけにはいかないよ。すべての元凶は僕なんだから。
だって。
もういいんだ。リミ、ノロセを殺してほしい。ノア2を破壊してほしい。僕がサポートするから。
Rimi's teeth sank into her lip and she wiped away her tears. Despite it growing more and more distant with every passing second, she did everything in her power to hold on to her consciousness. She reel-booted her D-sword. Countless fluttering feathers came falling down. Cradling Nanami with one hand, she held her sword in the other. The dripping sound landing at her feet conveyed the terrible amount of blood she had lost. The bleeding had yet to stop, for her wound was one that would never allow it to. A single slash of Norose's D-sword, one capable of bringing down all that stood against it. Rimi took the blow with her sword as she covered for Nanami, but their difference in weight proved fatal. Rimi could not take one of Norose's blows head-on with her small build. She was blown backward and slammed into the wall behind her. A crack tore through the wall of the planetarium's dome.
わざわざ生かしておいてやったというのに、恩をあだで返すとは。また、いたぶられたいのですか?
Norose slowly walked toward Rimi. His face was one of pure, unending confidence. Every facet of his being stood high above, looking down on her with great derision.
変態だよね、あなたって。
Remy grinned, but her smile was a strained one. And then, for some reason only she could have known, she swung her sword toward the cracked wall behind her. The wall collapsed, exposing the scenery of the outside world. It was raining. Dense rain clouds coated the sky.
逃げようとでも？
逃げないよ。でも。
Remy sat Nanami down on the ground, releasing her from her hold. Still holding her sword tight, she wrapped her arms around Nanami from behind.
ナナちゃんは関係ないでしょ。
Remy crafted a delusion, a single dazzling ray of light. By the time the light had subsided, the wing-shaped D-sword Remy held was no longer there. In their place, snow-white feathers had grown from Nanami's back. Oh, is she sending Nanami away, maybe back over to Takumi? Pure, untainted wings enveloped the blood-stained girl. It was a gruesome yet unendingly beautiful sight. Her form was like that of an angel. Nanami was unconscious, yet, as if they had a will of their own, the wings that adorned her began to flap. Remy parted from Nanami. Deeply bemused, Norose watched as Nanami flew up through the giant hole that had been opened in the planetarium. Oh, he's going to be like, oh, you sacrificed your D-sword to save her? Now you're screwed. Slowly and steadily she glided through Shibuya as the rain incessantly poured. Now unarmed, Remy watched as she flew.
ナナちゃん、無事でいて。
理想像を妄想によって翼としたのですか？それで君は逃げないのですか？
Narose already had Remy within range of his own D-sword. He could send her head flying with a simple swing. Nevertheless, Remy stared right back at him, bereft of all fear.
まだ逃げられないよ。あなたを殺さなきゃいけないから。
From her pocket, Remy retrieved a cross with a dark sheen. To be precise, however, it was not a cross, but rather a stake. The same as those that had been used in the crucifixion case. In that very moment, Remy had just real-booted one. Upon witnessing this display, Norose could not help but raise a scornful laugh.
私を殺す？そのようなおもちゃでですか？随分と舐められたものですね。
The blow was far too fast. Norose's D-sword, far longer than he was tall and at a speed thought unthinkable within mortal constraints, tore through Remy's flank. Only when her body had already begun to stagger from the slash did she realize she'd been cut. Remy collapsed, screaming at the top of her lungs from the sheer pain. Norose's attack was not just meant to kill, or was not one meant to kill. He could have killed her whenever he wished at this point, but he intentionally refrained from doing so. Approaching the writhing girl, he trampled down on her arm. Repeatedly alternating between pained breaths and gritting her teeth, Remy eventually stopped moving, or she had no other choice. The tip of Norose's enormous sword was right up against her blood-drenched back, but he had yet to pierce her with it.
もう一度聞かせてもらっていいでしょうか？やめませんよ。
In light of her request, Norose pushed his sword forward with great strength. This is not looking good for Remy. Hopefully she can come back, and I mean, he said he was going to allow her to have a last delusion. Was that delusion to save Nanami, or, you know, is she going to be able to actually come back from this? Maybe she can do something similar to what she did with, what Takumi did to, oh shoot, what's his name? The young detective, where, like, they switched places, and then he was the one who ended up getting, like, all pierced. The tip of his sword further gouged the flesh of her blood-stained body, clawing even deeper into her. It was as if he were pinning an insect for him to display.
それで、私を殺すと言いましたか？それとも私の聞き間違いでしょうか？
And yet, Rimi, still lying prone on the ground, reached for Norose's leg with one hand and grabbed onto it. She clung to him as tightly as she could. The depths of her teary eyes harbored resolute flames of determination. They glared at the scornful man from below.
殺してあげる。私があなたを。
Pulling his sword out from her, Norose kicked Rimi in the jaw with all of his strength. Her body tumbled across the floor like a rag doll.
しばらく会わないうちに実に不愉快な人間になったようですね。すでに君は用済みです。利用価値があるかと思い生かしておきましたが、もういりません。
Rimi was on the verge of death. She tried pushing her body up from the floor and crawling toward Norose, but without her D-sword and being unable to walk, she might as well have been already dead.
私に生意気な口を叩いたことを後悔しながら死んでいってください。例えばそうですね。これから30年ほど私が君に毎日拷問を施してあげましょうか。妄想の中でね。
Oh god, I remember when Takumi had that happen to him in a delusion where he was tortured. He was like, had a stake put up of him. Oh, here we go. Alright, here we go. Norose's lips twisted, keeping the collapsed girl surrounded by fluttering feathers within his sight. He formed a delusion. He strengthened his grasp on his D-sword and opened his channel into the Dirac Sea. The particles and antiparticles needed to materialize his delusion had now been created. And from those two collections, only the particles, through the signals of light that were established as sight, were sent into Sakihata Rimi's dead spots. Please don't let us endure another, 20 minutes of her being tortured.
それを
Alright.
待ってた。
She's gonna do something with the stake, obviously.
何?
Whose eyes are those eyes? In a single instant, the fluttering feathers transformed into eyes. Until this very moment, the only eyes watching him had been Rimi's, but now he was surrounded by an innumerable number of floating eyes.
その目、
Hey.
誰の目？
It was the last delusion Takumi had bestowed upon her. The particles Norose had sent were impeded by the countless eyes, rendering them unable to reach Rimi's dead spots, and those eyes connected to the Dirac Sea discharged many antiparticles, an indomitable defense which cancelled out the power of a gigalomaniac. Only because he was Nishijo Takumi, only because he was a gigalomaniac powerful enough to create a human, only because he had exhausted the final embers of his own life, could such a monstrous delusion have been real-booted. Astonished by the eyes surrounding him, Norose gulped. No matter where he looked, there were only eyes watching him. Not only did their numbers refuse to dwindle, but they grew with no end. They buried Norose's entire field of vision, and then they moved in toward him. Norose was instinctively overwhelmed by an intense fear. Gritting his teeth, he swung his D-sword. The cut eyes gushed blood, closed their eyelids, and vanished. But right behind every eye, there was another. No matter how many he cut down, their numbers remained the same.
私を見るな!
それなら、もう一生、目を開けなければいい。
Norose suddenly felt a great pressure on his chest, and the very next moment signals of pain sounded in his brain. As if they were a cloud of mist clearing away, the eyes that surrounded him all vanished without a trace. Before Norose's eyes stood Rimi, and in her hand was the cross-shaped stake lodged deep into his chest, and thus that was his end. After confirming Norose's death, Rimi fell to her knees, debilitated. She was bleeding terribly, her face pale as porcelain. She was barely even conscious now. Pained, irregular breath seeped from her mouth. Her eyes no longer saw anything. She could still faintly hear the ominous sounds of Noah 2, designating its status as fully operational. I guess I've got no choice but to entrust someone else with destroying it.
ごめんね。タク。
In a faint, almost inaudible voice, Rimi whispered into the air.
約束守れそうにないみたい。ナナちゃん助けたから。それで罪滅ぼしなんかにはならないけど、助けたから。
Rimi sluggishly raised her face. There should have been a section of the planetarium's wall that had collapsed, a section through which the sky should have been peeking, but a few moments ago it had been veiled completely by a collection of rain clouds, and because of that she could only wonder. Her eyes no longer allowed her to confirm its color, but Sakihata Rimi showed a faint smile. She looked up to the sky.
あの空をあなたともう一度見たかったな。タク、ありがとう。
When I opened the door to my base and stepped out, a clear blue sky jumped into view. I had the feeling that it had been raining, but it must have cleared up pretty fast. I hadn't been able to find Rimi anywhere. She'd vanished without a single word to me. Once again, she had disappeared on me. I'd been waiting and waiting for hours on end, but she never came back. Instead, waiting outside my base was...
Shogun!
Moving very slowly, the wrinkly boy in the wheelchair looked directly at me. Terrified, my legs gave out on me, and I fell to the ground.
君はこれから自由だよ。僕はあと1時間もしないうちに生き絶えるだろう。君に脅威を与える存在はリミが殺してくれた。
Hearing her name sent a wave of relief through me. Rimi had tried her hardest to protect me.
青井瀬名と折原梢の死体は僕が隠しておいた。
That answers that question. It was him. I thought maybe Taku had done that.
七海は病院に収容された。だから君はもう自由だ。
I didn't understand. Wasn't he my enemy?
リミはどこへ？
リミはもう戻ってこないよ。
え？
それじゃ。
Shogun, skillfully maneuvering his wheelchair, turned his back to me. I blinked once, and within that time frame, one that hadn't even spanned a single second, Shogun had vanished without a trace. What the hell? What had just happened? Only a couple moments after that, I heard a low-pitched quacking sound in the distance. Or quaking, not quacking, oh my god. Looking over toward the center of Shibuya, I saw something, as if there had been a giant explosion. A single cloud of dense black smoke was making its way up into the sky. Quack, quack. Something had happened. No, something was happening. An uprising? Something paranormal? Or maybe even a battle between gigalomaniacs. Whatever it was, it scared the hell out of me. That mysterious appearance from Shogun had also scared the hell out of me. I didn't want to go anywhere near what was happening out there.
リミはもう戻ってこないよ。
But Rimi could have been over there. She had disappeared once again, and yet I was surprisingly calm. It was strange. For some reason, I didn't feel like I'd been betrayed this time. This time, I had the strong belief that Rimi was somewhere out there, struggling all alone, trying her absolute hardest for my sake. But Rimi, haven't you done enough? Haven't you faced enough hardships as it is? You shouldn't have to suffer any longer. There's no reason to. It's not right. I remembered the soft sensation of her lips. I was going to look for her. I'd had enough of not doing anything, staying in my room all day like a coward. Our future, for both Rimi and I, in the lives that we shared. There were so many incredible, amazing things waiting for us in the future. I chose to believe that, and I knew in my heart it was right to do so.
朝 一緒に学校行って、学校では休み時間にどうでもいいこと話して、お昼休みは一緒にご飯食べて、夕方一緒に帰って、帰るついでにたまにどこかのお店に寄ったりして、タクの部屋でちょっとだけおしゃべりして、それでまた明日ねって手を振って別れて、そんなのでいいなら私いくらでもしてあげるよ。そういうの結構憧れなんだ。
Now I understood. I understood what she had meant by those words. How much she'd wished for such a simple life. When I thought back on everything, I realized the time I'd spent with her had only been a few hours in total, but I loved every last second of it. I was always happy when I was with her. To me, who'd gone through every day all alone as a shut-in, living as though I was dead, Rimi's smile had been my sole source of hope. It told me that a bright future existed ahead of me. Rimi had smiled for my sake, so now she should smile for her own sake. I believed she'd come back. But this wasn't my usual escapism, hoping to avoid reality. No, this was my resolve. I would believe only in her, for she had promised me she'd be with me forever. So get moving. Move your ass, Nishijo Takumi. And so, in order to see her again, I headed toward the destroyed Shibuya. Wait for me, Rimi. I'll find you. I know I will. Alright, there we go. Alright, there we go. It has been unlocked. With that, we only have the final ending to get to. The blue sky, where everything will hopefully be good for everybody. Hopefully everyone will survive. Taku, Takumi, Rimi, all of the other Gigalomaniacs, Nanami, everyone will have a good ending. That's the hope. I've worked damn hard enough to get here. So next episode is going to be the finale of Chaos Head Noah. And while I've got you guys here, I do want to say that we need to talk about what are we going to be playing next? What's going to be the next episode or the next Let's Play series? So I am currently going to be having a poll up on my community page, so I want you guys, if you can, to head over there and vote for what game you would like to see me play after this is over. So I hope you guys are excited for the finale of Chaos Head Noah. I am certainly interested to see how this is all going to wrap up. So stay tuned for the finale next week. Thank you guys so much for watching for this extra long episode, and I will see you next week for the finale of Chaos Head Noah. Until then. Special shoutouts to my top tier patrons: Revealing Storm, Lynn's VA, Lunar, Kenju Storm, iCognito, and Badcat.